All right. So apologies for starting a little late. I'm going to tell you the structure of today's session. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of a basic introduction to the spiritual search, a sort of general overview of it. We're going to do a little bit of practice of surrender and self-inquiry together. So that'll be maybe like hopefully around the first hour or so. And then we're going to plunge into a really beautiful text, or at least a couple of chapters of a really beautiful text called the Ribhu Gita. It's a very long text, but we're going to take a chapter or two. Is one of Ramana Maharishi's favorite texts. And I do feel like it is one of those texts which has a special quality of, as you read it, it kind of reprograms you in a way. It puts you in touch with something deeper. It's very special that way. So it'll be beautiful. So yeah, what is a spiritual search about? This is, it's a perspective basically based on a modern interpretation of Advaita Vedanta. And my views are heavily influenced by Ramana Maharishi, very famous sage from South India. Basically, if I was going to summarize it very quickly, what I would say is that there's a fundamental misconception at work in our lives, and that is that we wrongly identify as limited individual people, as limited experiencing, doing entities. And this identification leads to suffering, leads to an endless cycle of desire and fear, and also obscures from us the nature of truth, our true nature. And that obscuration leads us to be continuously looking for the answer to existential questions like, what is this all really about? Right? That thirst for what's really going on. Why is there evil in the world? Why are things as they are? All those kinds of questions about God, reality, etc. They're all linked to our incorrect identification with our individual identity. Our true identity is, and here I'm going to have to put an immediate asterisk, but because in words, immediately it's going to be distorted. But essentially, you can think of it in terms of the big picture as something like pure awareness. This is the way typically it's put. Pure awareness. So right now we think that we are a body and a mind, the thinker, the doer, someone with a past, someone with a future, someone with a family, someone with goals. That structure is not really our identity, or at least we're not limited to that identity, if you want to put it that way. And our way of thinking, our entire way of thinking is based on looking through this lens of this identity. There is another way of knowing, which will allow us to see the truth. And it is the purpose of the spiritual practice to penetrate through this kind of illusory identity. When that penetration through the illusory identity happens, this other way of knowing shines clearly. This other way of knowing is not based on words. It's not based on our usual kind of knowing, which is the knowing of something separate. But it is rather something which knows itself by itself, and therefore something which is not subject to doubt or limitation. All our usual knowledge is subject to doubt and limitation. Now, what prevents us essentially from seeing this truth? What prevents us from seeing the truth is our identification, which is sustained by the power of this extremely subtle, compelling illusion of being this entity. It's not just a verbal belief. There's a very, very, very subtle illusion at work. And the illusion at work is sustained by the movement of the mind. Now, why does the mind move? The mind moves because the fact that we identify as a person generates all these desires and fears. The desires and fears we can call attachments. So because of our attachments to desires and fears for the world being a certain way, for ourselves being a certain way, our mind moves, and the process of movement our identification as a limited person is reinforced. And the illusion which depends upon this movement of mind is sustained. It's a little bit like, there are many metaphors we could use, but one metaphor is if you take, for example, like an old-fashioned flip book, right? And you flip the pages quickly, it appears to be producing motion, right? Slow it down enough, and it's clear that the motion is just an illusion. So in the same way, there's a kind of illusion at work, which is dependent on the movement of the mind, and that movement of the mind is generated by attachments. The attachments are linked to identification, and they reinforce identification, and identification reinforces attachments. So the purpose of the spiritual search to throw a stick into the gears of this movement, and slowly grind it to a halt, and not just grind it to a halt, but then examine what remains. So there's a process of examination as well. It's not just quieting the mind, it's also looking. And looking relates to looking itself, the attempt to look itself quiets the mind, and quieting the mind leads to a greater interest in looking. So they're linked. I usually tell people as well, my general sort of breakdown is that seekers after ultimate truth, basically there's, three broad requirements, I would say, and how they actually play out depend upon each person, basically. But roughly, you need some kind of big picture or intellectual framework to understand what the search is all about. Now, how much of a framework you need depends on the person. There are some people like me who, needed a lot of questions answered, right? And how many questions you need to answer? You need to answer enough questions so that you're motivated to actually search. There are others who are much luckier who have more faith at the beginning, and they are fortunate. So you need some kind of intellectual framework enough to motivate you, enough to keep you on the search, basically. Then secondly, roughly speaking, you need some sufficient level of emotional equilibrium, I would say. And that can be attained many, many different ways. It depends on what exactly is going on. But emotional equilibrium means that you have a relatively quiet mind. Now, when I say relatively quiet mind, I mean a quiet mind being defined in this case as quiet enough to find yourself motivated to pursue the third piece, which I'll talk about in a second. So many seekers sort of founder at this dimension of things because they plunge onto that third piece and they run into obstacles. And the obstacles are very often rooted in this second area, which is this emotional area. I'm a huge proponent, which a lot of people don't talk about, I'm a huge proponent of getting psychotherapy, particularly psychoanalysis. Not all therapy is the same. I'm just going to say that briefly. I can go into more detail later individually if anyone wants to ask me about that. But there are a variety of ways, right, in the tradition, various traditions to quiet the mind, to deal with getting more inner peace. More inner peace, not of a permanent, perfect, absolute sort, which is what the real spiritual search is about, but getting enough relative peace to gain enough powers of concentration and motivation so that you can pursue, again, this third, harder piece, right? There's dietary controls, there's various yogic practices, all kinds of things. And what will work is going to depend on the individual and their particular situation. There's a lot of knobs to play with, basically. So just keep that in mind. That's something which, if you are trying to be on the road to ultimate truth and you're finding yourself facing obstacles which you don't understand, or you feel like you're not motivated, you feel like I don't know, there's something between you and your goal you don't understand, especially dealing with motivation, right? It's very often in that second realm that you actually have to step back from the search in a sense and deal with it if you want to progress. And then the third piece. So the third piece is the actual sort of tip of the spear as far as the search is concerned. And these are basically methods that are adapted from the techniques that Ramana Maharishi mentions, and he himself has distilled down the essence of the entire Advaita tradition to these extremely powerful, simple techniques. Not necessarily easy, but they are simple, and they're beautiful because they're deceptively simple. Because when you pursue them, you find out that they teach you what they are. As you do them, you learn more and more. Like, oh yeah, I thought I was doing this, but this is actually what it really is. And on it goes. It unspools that way and teaches you what the technique is, and ultimately teaches you what you are. So, so these two techniques are surrender and self-inquiry, and they are sides of a coin. Okay, so what are they about, basically? In a way, they're both about the same thing, which is getting the mind to turn away from its usual concerns, its usual way of looking at things, which is this habitual identification with the person and pursuing desires and fears, and essentially turning inward. And the idea behind these techniques is, initially, you do what you can. Maybe you do it sitting down if that's required for some X amount of period of time. But the desired goal is to try to get them to be done at every waking moment, because only when you try to do it every waking moment do you run up against your attachments. They come up as resistance to doing the technique. Only when you then feed the feelings that come up when you try to do the technique all the time do you get the chance to neutralize those attachments. Because the basic idea is something comes up, you feed it into the practice if you can, and in that moment of feeding it into the practice, you weaken that thought, you weaken that feeling, you weaken that attachment, you weaken that identification, and you experience in the process some element of peace. And that peace, which is still, a relative peace. When I say relative peace, I mean a peace that comes and goes. We're searching for something which is perfectly eternal, something which cannot be taken away ever, even in theory, right? So any peace that comes and goes is insufficient, no matter how long it lasts. It could last 1,000 years, doesn't matter. It will end after 1,000 years, so that's not sufficient. But these little drops of honey, which are the peace that you get when you feed your normal day-to-day thoughts and feelings into the practice, start to motivate the mind to do the practice more and more and more. And it starts to turn away from its usual attachments and turn more and more and more towards the practice. And the desire for liberation becomes stronger and stronger. Attachments become weaker and weaker. It's like a wheel that spins and burns and burns and burns all the attachments in the process. And at the end, the mind is very, very still, like like a shiny mirror. And in that mirror, there can be, grace can shine, basically, because it is grace in the end that shines and that liberates. It's not our effort, but we can try to bring the mind to a state which is conducive to that grace. So with that said, any questions so far? I know I've said a lot very quickly, and I've just given a very, very big picture view because of time constraints, but a lot of information on my website and all that if you want to go dig into any details. You're welcome to ask me questions afterwards, obviously. But the most important thing that I can impart to you, which is what I'm going to do right now, is the practices. The practices are the core of Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta has an extremely sophisticated philosophical structure. You can dig in and you can find logical arguments that go deep. But the point of the system is not those arguments. The point of the system is not to get yourself to be able to recite like a parrot, this whole beautiful logical chain. The point of it is to look inside and go beyond thought, because thought is a trap. So we're trying to only use thought to get rid of thought's influence on ourselves. We have to use thought to cut thought, but the end result is we want to go and see something which is not thought. So we should keep that in mind. So scriptures, teachings, they're all good. They're all good, and they're all necessary, and they're all motivational up to a point. But then, at a certain point, you have to recognize that no one can see the truth for you. You can read as many scriptures as you want. You can know all the viewpoints you want, but you will have to look for yourself ultimately. And the resistance to looking for yourself is the whole issue. So that's a process. The attachments to your normal identity resist seeing the truth, because the truth, if you've been living your life as if it's all real, everything you care about is real, then in some sense, recognizing that it's fictional is not something that part of you wants to see. So those attachments have to be softened through the gradual, continuous practice. When they're soft enough, when the mind has experienced enough peace through the practice, it will willingly give itself up to grace. So the two practices are surrender and self-inquiry. So let me explain self-inquiry first. So self-inquiry is, it's a term that's used often in the literature in different ways, and people are a little confused about it because, for example, if you read many of these Advaita texts, we'll talk about, you're not the body, you're not the emotions, you're not, prana, life force, you're not the intellect, the deciding factor, you're not this, you're not this, you're not this. You are, it might say in this text, it might say you are the perfect, unblemished, pure consciousness, Brahman, self, That is a beautiful framework. It's useful to have in the back of your mind. But that logical chain is not what I mean by self-inquiry. Self-inquiry starts with the very basic, ordinary, immediate experience you have of existing. Like right now, I know I exist. I know I exist. I know I'm aware. Just like in the same sense, when you wake up in the morning, you're like, yeah, I'm here. That sense. And what self-inquiry seeks to do is it seeks to focus and find that sense in your experience, Like you seem to know this fact that I'm here. And the question is, how do you know? Where is this knowledge coming from? Because if I look at, I don't know, this yoga mat in front of me, it's not telling me that I am. When I look at the yoga mat, I already know that I am. And then I see the mat. The mat, in fact, by seeing the mat, I know I'm not the mat. When you see any object, by object, I mean any experience meaning anything that you're perceiving, anything that you're thinking, anything that you're feeling, anything in short with a boundary, which means it's limited in space, limited in time, it has a limit, it has facets, it has aspects, it has qualities, right? You immediately know you're not that. There's a distance between you and that. If there were not such a distance, you would not be able to know it as an object. So I'm here viewing this object. The thing is, we don't normally think about the fact that I'm here viewing the object. Our attention is 100% focused on the objects. We don't turn attention to the fact of the observer and just what the observer is. Like, what is it? When I say that I'm here, what do I mean by this? I myself mean something by it, but what is it that I mean? And when I ask this question, it's again not really an invitation to, you may inevitably be drawn into this at some point, but it's not really an invitation to think about it. It's an invitation to recognize that I seem to have this intuition, quote unquote, this feeling, I say quote unquote because we're trying to find out exactly what it is, right? For lack of a better word, we'll call it a feeling, we'll call it intuition, we'll call it something very, very basic, very immediate that tells me that I'm here. But where is it? Where in my experience is it? Where is it? Where am I? It's another way of looking at it, right? So the classic question is, who am I? But you could just as easily say, where am I? It's all the same thing. Where is this sense of me? Where am I sitting? Where am I seated, right? Because anytime you have an experience, it's like if you were looking at, a valley or something like that, you can't see the valley from all points of view. You're sitting somewhere. If you sat here, you have this angle on it. If you sat there, you have that angle on it. So we have a kind of seeming angle on our own everyday experience. But where are we seated? Where is our seat? So the classic rule you have to keep in mind is when you then try to turn inward and locate yourself, where am I? Anything that your mind then alights on, anything that then comes to mind in any way, you have to ask yourself, am I aware of this? Because if you are aware of this, then it can't be you. By our earlier definition, right? Because in order to be aware of something, there has to be a distance, an experiential distance between you and it. So what you're looking for is the one who is aware of that. So for example, as many people might say, if I said, oh, where do you feel like you are? They might say, oh, no, I feel like I'm in my head somewhere, right? One of many possible answers, right? You would apply the technique by saying, okay, well, am I aware of this feeling in my head? And clearly the answer is yes, I'm aware of it. So that can't be me. So then you might ask, well, who is aware of the feeling in my head? Meaning that feeling, you see, has been mislabeled as I. So then where am I? You see, and you're going to see that the I turns out to be hidden through a series of mislabelings, like mislabelings stacked on each other, basically. And your point is to hunt through, push away the mislabelings one at a time, and look for the light that's illuminating all of them. Because anytime you have an object that occurs, like you're looking for yourself, and let's say you have that feeling in your head, I feel like I'm in my head, it is quote unquote a wrong answer because you're aware of it. But simultaneously, it is telling you something very important because it's still a reflection of the fact that you exist, right? Every object in your experience is also a reminder of the subject, of you. So, oh yeah, I'm experiencing this. So with that said, I think what I want to do is I want to do a little practice, just 5 minutes. And I want you to all try this. At the end of 5 minutes, I'll ask you if anyone wants to share their experience, basically, of how it was. So we'll try it. So I'm just at a little 5-minute timer, and then we'll see how it goes. So here we go. Also, by the way, I should say I encourage you. You don't have to. It's totally up to you. If you really feel uncomfortable with it, do it with your eyes closed. But I encourage you to try it with your eyes open, because what we're trying to do is build a practice so that you can bring it into every day, every second of your life. And so if you do it with your eyes open when you're sitting down, you'll be more able to export that into the rest of your life. Okay, so enough said. So 5 minutes, here we go. All right. You want to share your experience? Uh-huh.
Normally, I maintain my eyes closed.
Uh-huh.
So that I do kind of doze out in between.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But this was very powerful because keeping my eye open helped me to stay awake.
Stay awake. Uh-huh.
Second thing is I was focusing on the banner, entire banner.
Uh-huh.
And then my mind started analyzing the shape and color and other things.
Uh-huh.
Then I focused on the Om.
Uh-huh.
And then I was able to narrow down my focus.
Uh-huh.
The concentration, but still mind started wandering.
Uh-huh.
Then I started chanting Om along with my exhalation.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was able to.
So great. So did you, were you able in that time to ask yourself who is observing this process?
No,
You're just trying to keep the focus of some kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I recommend if you're trying to do inquiry, right? I mean, I can understand like you're trying to keep your mind quiet enough. But it can be helpful if you see your mind wandering, just notice, like I'm observing this wandering. I'm observing this wandering. So where is the eye? Where is the eye who's observing the wandering, right? Because you're like, oh, it's wandering here, it's wandering there, trying to rein it in. But one very effective way of reining it in is to ask yourself to notice the observer of these distractions.
Yeah, because my mind was not wandering. I was just focused on that because that was quite still.
Oh, I see. Well, okay. Well, so yeah. So if you want to do inquiry, I would suggest if your mind is still, ask yourself, who is observing the stillness? Who's observing the stillness? Because that's a common misconception, right? Enough to just bring your mind to so-called stillness. Stillness is still a thought. Stillness, so we're trying to penetrate beyond that. Now, how do we know stillness is a thought? Because it has a beginning and an end. Our mind is agitated, then it so-called stills, and then agitates again. So the stillness in between, while it's a good thing, still needs to be inquired into. Like, who is aware of the stillness? Because the weak point of the illusion of identification is this question of the I. That's why we're looking into it, because I is the animating force between all your life activities. It's, you know, my family, my career, my goals, my fears, my this, my that, everything me, right? So the whole point is, well, who am I? Like, okay, I'm living my entire life. Every second of every day is lived according to these questions that animate me. The thoughts occur to me, the feelings occur to me, right? But who is this me that we are talking about? That's what we're trying to bring that question to focus, because we don't think about it.
Yeah, I usually practice this, so not as I've not been exposed to a lot of practices as such, but intuitively. I also follow Alam Prabhu's vachanas, which are Virshaiva Shivandraita.
Okay.
So that one, and also Swami Vivekananda's meditations, as well as these Brahma Sutra lectures where it says idam and aham.
Okay.
So I was doing that. So, and since I'm used to it, but I never sat down like this and did. So that was very powerful.
Oh, good.
And then, so the mind was, so there was a little sound there, and I go, idam. So I was just sitting and qualifying idam, where is aham, right?
Yes. Idam meaning not me, essentially, right? In this case, it's an it.
Maybe. This is not it. This is not it.
Okay.
And then the mind is very elusive. So it goes deeper and deeper into this. Now what it thinks is aham.
Right. Yes.
And then it goes.
Yes.
Yeah. Now I get it. Idam.
Yes.
Now I'm
yes.
like deeper. Idam.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Each time it's an object. It's not exactly. Precisely. And so what's aware of that? Exactly. And so to hold to that.
Saying no to everything, and it takes me deeper and deeper into another idam.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
5 minutes. I apologize.
That's okay.
That's where it is.
See, I'll tell you, right? The real aham is not exactly, well, anyway, it's not exactly an object. It kind of is and it kind of isn't. But all you have to do is keep that process going all the time. That's the point. Everybody.
I kind of do that.
You kind of do. Okay,
just so especially when there are challenges, right? And something bothers, like we say,
Yeah. So that's helpful.
I've been doing, but now I could see the power of the group practice.
Well, the group practice is there, and bringing it up when you have challenges is good. But what I'm suggesting is, can you keep this up every second, regardless of whether there's a so-called challenge? Because the point is, this is a riddle, right? Where is aham? Where is the I? this is the riddle. Here I am experiencing it, but when I look for it, I can't seem to find it, right? All I see is a series of objects, series of events, right? So that riddle, we want it to become an obsessive, like mania, to find the answer to that riddle, to look for it, right? To turn everything in our life towards it, right? All the time obsessed with it, because every other thought, it's only relevant because we think it's ours, but we don't know who we are. So why do we care, right? That's the point, right? Every thought that comes in, whether it's a challenge or not, in fact, especially if it's something pleasurable, then it's harder, right? Because yeah, why do I want to, disidentify myself from this? This sounds great, right? Whatever it is. So those things we want to say, who's aware of this, great piece of music or this delicious thing or whatever it is, right? The point is to keep our mind, the goal is, it's going to take a while, but the goal is like a continuous spinning top, right? All the time, drilling, every second. That's the goal. Anyone else? Sure.
Yeah, it seems like every time I do inquiry now, where it's like, that which seems to be asking any sort of question is just another thought.
Yeah.
It just tends to just immediately just go into surrender. It's just a mental muscle, and it's like that which is like that effort that's trying to like bang its head against the wall, but like no. It just kind of just leads to it's just like just a contracted like sensation of the body that's kind of that is that sense of like I am this body thing over here. And then when there is that relaxation, it's like, whoa, who is aware, who is experiencing this body? And there's only, I guess you could say, the intuition that is prior to the senses.
Yeah, right. So that sense that it's prior to the senses and that it can't be found, you should just know. So I mean, that's why there are these two paths, right? So surrender is, I'm going to cover that in a few minutes, but it is, a perfectly independent and complete path. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I will just say, right, from the pure inquiry standpoint, right, it's not a futile inquiry. Where am I? In one sense, you might initially say, if you listen to my logic, and some people think about this fact, which is sort of true, right? Here we are saying, anything you're aware of is an object, so it can't be you. And, so how could you possibly find yourself? Because anything that you find will not be you, right? So, and in fact, in a way, what you're sort of suggesting along that point, that it's feeling to you like, yeah, the questioner is just a thought. That's true, but that is not the answer. See, there's still the fact of your being aware of that, and so the riddle remains. There is a riddle and there is an answer of sorts, because what you think you are has a very, very strange, peculiar character. The ego, which is what gives you the sense of the I am the witness sense, ultimately, I'm observing. That sense is peculiar to the waking state of consciousness, and so that very, very magical thought, it has a certain quality aspect of it that's an object, but it also has an aspect of it that's not an object. So this search is not futile. There is something where you come to a boundary, you keep pushing, and then there will be a shift in perspective. So generally speaking, what keeps people from clarity is the lack of continuous, intense effort all the time, and that's the same as saying that attachments keep us away, because that's the only reason we don't practice all the time, is because we feel like XYZ is more important. Yeah, I'll come back to it. Let me do this first. Those attachments basically are the parts of ourselves that don't want to see the truth, basically. So yeah, but you can go to surrender, which we'll talk about in a second. That's fine too, actually. And you want to share? Yes.
So I just love the phrase, how you reframed it to where I am, to who I am. I think it's just brilliant. So in this exercise we were doing, like you three are sitting here, this is what I was observing, okay? There is the lady, there is the phone, we can see that phone.
The little phone,
So one is say you are observing the object, the phone,
Yes.
and there is this lady sitting separate.
Mhm.
So there are like almost like three things happening. Object, observer, subject,
Mhm.
observer.
Yes.
So in my kind of deep reading, I've had some experiences like that, but they were very, it came and it was gone.
Yes.
And I'm always chasing that. I'm like, I love that feeling. It was so different. But again, as you said, I don't know how to do that. Sadhana, the practice. Keep it, as you said, every day.
So you bring up a really good point. Right? So you had these sort of, sounds like some kind of glimpses or flashes of insights into there's something like different than what you normally think of, right? As yourself. That's what it sounds like what you're saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then now you're chasing those things. So and you're like, I don't know how to be there all the time. You can't be in those glimpses all the time. And the point is not to be in those glimpses all the time, because those glimpses are, they are just experiences. They're just thoughts. And you can't, if we try to relive them, we'll never get to them. What needs to happen is you need to really, that where am I question, if it rings true with you, focus on that. Don't worry about whether you get those beautiful glimpses. They'll come in time automatically. But your point is, who am I? Where am I? Where am I? Where am I now? You know, the point is, where is, when you ask yourself, where am I? Where is your mind going? Does that make sense? So yeah, so that's what we're trying to do every second. You know, we don't necessarily have to live in a state of grace every second. That's not up to us. What is up to us, seemingly anyway, is the practice. The practice is, I'm here observing these three objects. Where is the observer, right? Where, when I ask you, do you see this phone? And you say, yes, I do. For a second, your mind darts somewhere to give me that answer. Where does it go? Go somewhere. Where? You know, that's the question. Anybody else on Zoom or here? Okay, so this is a very, very quick elementary introduction to self-inquiry, but this is an incredibly powerful practice. This practice, followed consistently and with intensity, will teach you what it is more and more and more deeply. As you try it, even if you try it imperfectly, if you try it like you don't fully understand it, but you're still trying it, merely the attempt to try it will itself educate you, because there's an inner guru that will rise and educate you deeper and deeper as to what's, you know, what needs to be done. And that attempt will bring you to the goals. It's, you know, about the intensity and continuity, which will build over time. You know, as you do it, you know, you may not have initially the burning desire. You may have some desire, but not fully burning desire. That's totally understandable, because the desire you have for spiritual liberation, which is a good desire, is in a way opposed by a whole bunch of other desires. By following the practice as much as you possibly can, which may not be all the time just yet, you slowly will like eat up the power from those other desires, and integrate it, call it into this single desire for liberation. And the practice will become, as a result of that, more and more continuous over time, until you have that raging river of fire, you know, for liberation. And then that will be, you're very close to finding what you're looking for. So the other practice is, as you mentioned, surrender. So what is surrender? So surrender is, like I say, the flip side of the coin of self-inquiry. So self-inquiry, what's happening is you're looking for yourself. You're looking for yourself. As you turn yourself, as you turn towards that, I mean, a metaphor I like to use is, it's like you're looking at a mirror, okay? And you're looking at a mirror, and normally when you look at a mirror, you notice the objects in the mirror, right? It's reflecting your face or whatever, other furniture or whatever else, the wall. If I asked you to notice the shiny surface of the mirror, what would happen to the objects? They would blur. They would blur, because your mind can't notice the surface of the mirror and the objects at the same time. Those perspectives are mutually exclusive. So when you look for I, what you're trying to do is effectively notice the surface of the mirror. And then what you notice is, oh yeah, what I thought was a surface of the mirror is actually another reflection in the second mirror, basically. And then you notice the surface of that mirror, And then you have a third mirror and a fourth mirror and all that. And you follow the series of mirrors, basically. That's your goal. Or another way of looking at it is there's a series of objects that are all illuminated by light. Like right now, we're looking around. We normally just see the things like, oh yeah, there's a table, there's people here, this is a phone, right? What we don't think about is actually we're seeing reflected light. That's what our vision is, right? It's not, we're not actually seeing per se the object itself, we're seeing the light reflected off the object. Because if you had, a different animal, who had a different vision, they would see something different, right? Because their light sensors would be different than ours. So the point is, in the same way, we're trying to notice the fact that there is light, inner light, light of awareness that is illuminating every experience that we have. And we're trying to turn our attention from the object that is illuminated to the fact of its illumination. And trying to see, well, what is that illumination? Like, what exactly is it? Where is it coming from? Where in me is it coming from? Where am I in this picture? Because there's a picture we have. When I start looking for myself, all I see is, things drawn in the picture. But where's the person looking at the picture? Who must be there somewhere. So anyway, surrender is a slightly different version of this process, a different flavor of this process. So the way I explain it, which, forgive me for people who've heard this explanation before, but I fall back to the same metaphors over and over again because they're useful, is, everything that is, imagine everything that you are perceiving, that is everything that you're seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling, everything that you're thinking, everything that you're feeling, everything that you're imagining, right? Everything that's in your experience is just on a TV, okay? It's just on a TV in the corner. And you do not have to turn the TV off. You do not have to change the channel on the TV. You do not have to say everything on the TV is good or great or wonderful or be grateful for it or be happy about it, okay? None of those things. Your job is simply this, not to allow your attention to become engrossed in the TV. Not to allow your attention to look at any particular object and become like absorbed in it. Sometimes we think, oh yeah, absorption is a good thing, right? We should be careful about this, right? Like in certain versions of meditation or certain ideas of the spiritual, you have this idea that absorption in an activity is a good thing. I mean, in a way it is good for that activity. Like for example, we have this idea of flow and stuff like that, right? You could be playing tennis and you might have these moments where you're completely absorbed in the sport, right? And your mind does go quiet and it does feel like things are just happening in some sense. You could have those experiences. While that's great for playing tennis, for the purposes of the spiritual activity, what we're trying to do is not get absorbed in anything, whether it's a good absorption like that or a bad absorption like an absorption in anger or lust or something like that, so-called bad absorptions. The truth is, it doesn't matter what you're absorbed in. We're trying to recall our attention away from absorption in anything, including even mental silence, even peace, even bliss. Those are experiences. Anything which changes, anything which had a beginning and which will therefore have an end, we want to recall our attention so that we're continuously taking our attention back every second, taking our attention back. That's what it means. That's what I call this ignoring all thought or ignoring everything. So when I say ignore, I do not mean that you have to suppress anything. It can all be there. Everything can come through. Every feeling is permissible, not a problem. Let it be there. Even the negative feelings, depression, anxiety, whatever it is, it can all come through. Your job is simply this, to recognize this is just a passing thought and do not take it to be real and do not allow your mind to linger in it, dwell in it, and therefore take it to be real. When it does that, it takes it to be real. So you're continuously, alertly, vigilantly keeping your mind from being absorbed in anything particular. This idea of anything particular will itself be the educational factor in surrender, because as you try to do surrender, your mind will automatically will start becoming subtler. Why? Because you'll start ignoring things. What are the things? The things are your attachments, basically. Otherwise, you wouldn't notice them. So anything you care about will appear, and you'll start to ignore them. And as you start to ignore them, you're going to start to experience more peace. And as you experience more peace, your mind will weaken the attachments and you'll become more attached to the practice. And so your mind will quiet down. And then you'll ignore even those quieter states. and then your mind will quiet even further, and you'll ignore even those quieter states and keep ignoring and ignoring like that. So that's one part of the instruction. The other part of the instruction is, which is really actually the same thing, just I like breaking it into two pieces because it's helpful to understand, is don't use your willpower on anything except the practice. The practice does require willpower. Practice requires constant, vigilant effort. Why does it require constant, vigilant effort, even though it's called surrender? It's because we have a practice, we have a habit, I should say, built up over our whole lives of unsurrender, of unrelaxation. So we need to undo those habits. Undoing those habits requires effort. So we have to put an effort in to staying vigilant so that we aren't drawn into thought, and the thought's going to draw us into using our willpower and reinforcing our attachments and reinforcing our identity as individual people. So we're trying to stop that cycle. In order to stop that cycle, you need to exert effort, but only on one thing, on the practice. On all other things, we want to drop our willpower. Whatever, when I say willpower, what I mean is this: that sense you have of like doing something effortfully, which takes, like, it feels like a burden. It feels like I am doing it. I have to focus on it. I have to put this focus on it, and this sort of painful kind of attention on it. You just take that sort of inner muscle, which sort of feels like an inner muscle, and just don't use it on anything except the practice. Use it only on the practice. That's the practice. And you'll notice, really, if you try this, that, see, these two instructions, again, are really the same thing. Because the only reason you would ever use your willpower is because you take something to be real. Like, yeah, I'm really at work. I really have this assignment. I really need to do it well. And I really need to focus on it if I want to do it well. Therefore, I'm putting my focus on this assignment, right? Using my willpower, therefore, to do it, right? If I ignored it, I would immediately not take it to be real. And then I wouldn't use my willpower on it. Similarly, if I don't use my willpower on something, it's almost impossible to take it to be real. One kind of implies the other, basically. So these two pieces are really the same. And also want you to notice, right, as you draw your attention away from normal experience, right, and you keep reclaiming it, you keep reclaiming your attention to yourself. I almost just said it, actually. You're moving your mind away from the world of objects. And when I say objects, it doesn't just mean outside objects, inside objects too. Thoughts, feelings, these are all objects. This is all part of the world. There's only one place for your attention to go. When you move it away from objects, it moves towards subject. So it is a backhanded version of self-inquiry. Because in self-inquiry, you're moving towards I, and in the process, you are ignoring objects. Because when you turn to I, you're like, well, yeah, who's aware of this? Who's aware of this? So the objects become unimportant, and you're only looking at who. When you do surrender, you're just saying, like, I'm ignoring everything and relaxing. I'm ignoring everything and relaxing, right? This alone I'm doing. In the process, you are moving away from all particular things. When you move away from all particular things, you have to be moving towards yourself automatically. So you're backing into I in that process. Any questions so far?
Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Backing off from everything. That's also bringing yourself down to silence, but then you say silence is an experience.
Yes.
Isn't that I'm confused?
No, yeah. Well, so there's two steps, right? So as you back away from everything, your mind does get quieter. And then you keep on ignoring even that. You keep, just like, for example, like suppose you were looking at, I don't know, like something really beautiful. Again, you're looking at, like, I don't know, like a beautiful mountain range or something like that, right? So it is beautiful. And there would be a tendency to just admire it, and your mind would be lost in it. Like, oh yeah, it's so beautiful. You have this sense of calm and peace, right? Like nature is beautiful, right? And then at a certain point, you kind of remember, oh yeah, I'm here. I'm sitting here looking at this mountain range, right? So you snap back to yourself. What we're trying to do is constantly snap back. Even when the mind is silent, it's like looking at that mountain range. It's like looking at something beautiful. So it is a beautiful experience, but it's still an experience. Still, it's a good thing because we want to go first from an agitated mind to a quieter and quieter and quieter mind, and then beyond even that quietness. That's the sort of sequence of things.
Yeah, when somebody asks you questions, you're not able to hear the audience, so you can repeat.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so just to repeat that question, she asked, well, it seems like when you move away from objects, your mind would become quiet, but then I'm saying surrender even the quietness. So what's the idea behind that, right? And the idea behind that is that yes, the quietness is good because for a couple of reasons. One is it motivates the practice, it removes the attachments, and then it also becomes a more and more and more clear reflection of what you are. But it's still just a reflection of what you are. See, the silence becomes like a shiny mirror. So in a way, like I said, surrender is just another version of self-inquiry in a way. In self-inquiry, the same thing happens. Your mind will become silent eventually. And in a way, that's like you're asking, where am I? Who am I? And the silence is a kind of response to that. The silence is like, yeah, this is who you are. It's showing you a mirror. Like, this is you. This is you. But we have to be careful because when it's showing you a mirror, a clear, shiny mirror showing the image of your true self, which is that silence, the image in a mirror it's not exactly you. It's a reflection of you, which is different. So there has to be another move, which is the recognition that, oh yeah, it's not that I am literally this image. This image is reflecting me. You see the difference? So that last realization is not something that you can make happen, but you nevertheless, you try by continuously either inquiring into who is aware of the silence or surrendering and trying to ignore the silence. Don't let my mind get stuck in the silence, because that silence becomes the beautiful reflection of the self can become a kind of trap, And so we don't want to stay with it. We want to try to go beyond it. And in our trying to go beyond it, eventually grace will intervene and get us beyond it, basically. Yes?
Yeah, it seems like, in my own experience, it's been like, it kind of goes along with the same thing with self-inquiry, where it's just like that. Like when you're relaxing, even relaxing into, that when the mind's going nuts, right? You might be used to just kind of engrossing yourself into certain things that, like, when you go to objects to keep your mind quiet, whether it's like ice cream or TV or something, and there's that mental agitation, it's like that itself is that emotional purification that you're talking about, being able to still, like, in the midst of whatever's going on, that is the purification of stuff burning away. And that gives more energy. To the concentration, whether it be inquiry or.
So as you maintain the practice and keep your mind calm, even while many other urges arise, those urges start to burn up in the fire of these practices, because the practices are undermining them in a sense, right? Because, okay, who's eating the ice cream? As soon as you ask that question, or as soon as you ignore whatever is happening in the moment, whether it's eating ice cream or not, immediately your mind starts touching mental silence. Again, the silence is a good thing. We're not saying silence is a bad thing. All we're saying is it's not enough. We want to get to the silence and then go further. Okay, so let's try it little activities. Just 5 minutes again, same thing. Try the surrender, which means ignore everything, right? Basically, I say ignore all thoughts. The reality is everything is a thought. Every perception, everything you're experiencing is a thought. So just try to keep your mind, withdraw your mind from it. Just keep on withdrawing back to yourself. Keep, this self-remembrance, really, in a way, right? That you're not this, right? Don't get mesmerized. Don't get hypnotized by anything in your mind. Just keep coming back, and also try to just otherwise relax. So you have this extreme vigilance on the one hand, extreme alertness, but within that fortress of alertness, which you're protecting, your willpower is otherwise relaxed. That's the practice. So let's try that for 5 minutes and see how that goes. All right. Anyone want to share an experience? Peace. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
This time I just, there is no thought, just let it go. And I'm here all the time. And no focus, no concentration. And even though where am I, I'm here. And who am I? How do you care, you know?
Right. From the surrender point of view, doesn't matter. Right. Yes. Yes, exactly. Good. Yeah. So yes, peace and this sounds like you said peace as well, essentially, in other words. And you know, that peace is best sustained when we realize, like we said earlier, you know, this too is a thought. So ignore it. That'll actually sustain the peace better than any other way, by the way. But yes, I mean, it's so sweet, really, right, to let go like that. That sweetness is the sweetness of the self, because all our problems are in thought. If we ignore the thoughts, there's no problems. And then you might have a thought being like, well, what now? That's also a thought, so ignore it. Ignore.
This is only at the time where you want to really do it, right? But not doing the daily task.
Oh no, it is during daily tasks. The point of this exercise is to do it all the time. See, daily tasks, and this is of course one of the most typical things people ask, it's true of inquiry and surrender, right? How will they get done? There is an illusion that you are the doer of your tasks. That's what the illusion of identification is that I am sitting in the driver's seat of my car. I'm controlling. The reality is you are not the controller. You were never the controller. You're not the controller now. You will never be the controller in the future. You're like a ghost in a machine. You have no control, actually. Only control you have is to recognize you have no control and therefore be at peace. What will need to happen will happen without you. Now, I know it doesn't feel like that. It feels like, oh, I need to be involved. That's the illusion. So we're trying to break the illusion. So you have to either break the illusion by examining its weak point directly through inquiry and saying, well, who is it that thinks this work needs to be done? Or you have more faith and you just surrender and say, I don't care. And every time any thought that says I must do something, or what should I do? Big red flag question, right? Comes up. You just ignore it. You don't take sides. You don't say, oh, I should do this or I should do that. You just ignore it and say the decision will happen one way or the other without me. Your body and mind are capable of doing everything without you. They've always been doing everything without you. There's only been the illusion that you have been involved. To break that illusion, you have to first make the mind very subtle through these practices. And then it will become clear to you that the illusion is an illusion. So either again, yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, so yes, during daily tasks, during everything important, that's how the attachments break down. You feed this in, you say, I'm gonna be at peace, period, right? I'm not gonna get involved. I'm ignoring this, right? Whatever my mind and body do spontaneously, without my effort, without my deliberate concentration is great. That's not a problem, right? View yourself, as I've said before, like as if you were a person 10 feet away, right? Like I'm 10 feet away, there's a person over there. That person has the daily task responsibility. They'll do it or they won't, not my problem. Just like you don't worry about your neighbor doing their daily tasks. They either do it or they don't. Not your issue, you have no control. So that's what surrender is saying, basically. I'm just gonna relax. My only thing I'm not relaxing is the practice, because if you relax the practice, then you'll become vulnerable and you'll get eaten up by thought. So we're just trying to protect ourselves from that fate, that's it. But otherwise, we're relaxed. Because the idea is this peace all the time, not just during sitting, all the time.
There's this concept in the Chinese, it's called Wu Wei. Inaction, reaction.
Right, sure, yes. Yeah, I think it's similar. I mean, it probably depends on exactly who you ask, but yes, the idea of action through, action and inaction and inaction and action is very connected to this. Because the reality is those moments you get in a specific activity, like let's say tennis, where you do feel those moments, those glimpses of, oh, this is like, people have this, all the athletes, musicians, you know, people in any skilled activity have report these moments one way or the other. And they work on a continuum, anywhere from just being absorbed in the activity and time just going on to these moments of like effortless brilliance, right? Like being in the zone, right? Where suddenly it feels like it's like a dream. It's just happening without me, but yet you're performing at the top levels of your ability, right? So it shows that the mind is capable of doing everything without you, but that reality is only glimpsed for a moment because you've gotten that activity, because you put so much effort into that activity, basically. Our goal in this practice is to recognize that feeling is in fact the permanent underlying reality. Things only happen that way. There's no other way in which things happen. So yeah, but there's a delusion that covers it up. We're trying to get through the delusion, you know?
Going back to your point of driving the car.
Yes.
So we are not thinking, we are just driving. What are we actually, what should be the condition of the mind at that point when we are driving the car?
Yeah, so you should be acting as if I have nothing to do with this, basically, right? So your attention is, this is all irrelevant. This is a hallucination, basically. You'll see that the mind and body are capable of driving without you. And and if there's
What we already do, that we don't really drive the car, you know, we just, you know, things happen.
yes, things happen, exactly, that's right.
No, but you are not thinking like that, right? You are not saying, I am changing
Yes.
the gear right now.
Yes, exactly. It's all automatic, essentially. And frankly, whether the car drives itself or not, the question is, it's not your responsibility. It's not more than your responsibility. It's just not under your control, right? Because we can make errors in driving. We can make errors in driving even if we're trying to drive properly. So it doesn't really make a difference, is the truth, whether or not you are trying to drive the car or not. What will happen will happen. Whether you do drive the car well or you drive the car poorly is not up to you. The mind's functions can happen without you, just in the same way that your breathing happens without you, the heart beating happens without you. Even our complex cognitive functions happen without us. It doesn't seem like they do because we identify with the attention that goes out. It's very hard to see, how can it happen without me? But it can happen without you. It does happen with you. It happens without you right now. But because of the nature of the illusion, there's like a mental illusion at work. The mind can't see. It feels like it's required. Like if I don't put the effort in, it's not going to happen. But the reality is whatever will happen with or without you. So if you're surrendering while driving is happening, what you're doing is you're trying to keep your attention focused on the act of not getting sucked into the thought of driving or the thought of anything else, right? Keeping your attention, collecting it as if the driving was happening in a movie, right? And you're trying, I don't want to focus on the movie. I want to focus on not get sucked into the movie, Does it make sense?
Mhm.
I think the more,
Sorry?
the more we try.
Not particularly.
I'm still not there. I don't know. I'm not able to catch you.
So perhaps then for you, so I mean, sometimes the techniques, one of the other techniques works better. You can view it as, I don't know, did inquiry strike you more as more intuitive? Did self-inquiry strike you as more intuitive? Did you understand it better?
I don't know what that means.
Like the first
Is it-
exercise,
is
the
this
who am I?
equivalent to- Sorry for the.
No, sure.
Is not equivalent to nimitta matram bhava sabyasachi, like become the instrument and not really the person doer?
Well,
That
that's
I think our people might.
it's a slightly dangerous phrasing because anytime we're asking ourselves to become something, then there's like a kind of fantasy attached to that. So I prefer to say that like we're trying to get away from all thought because rather than saying I'm going to become an instrument, then you have this conception of what it means to be an instrument, right? And you're trying to be that, whatever that means. Which is not always clear. Whereas what we're really trying to do is all conceptions that I'm the doer or I'm not the doer, I'm the instrument or I'm not the instrument, all those ideas are ideas, all of them without exception. So we want to get out of all of it, meaning we don't want to let our mind dwell in any of those ideas. Does that make sense? It might be very similar in practice, perhaps, depending on how one understands what you're saying. But sometimes these ideas of become this are can confuse people, and then they think they have to feel a certain way, right? And we're not trying to feel a certain way. Feelings are also thoughts. So we don't want to believe that surrender, for example, means that we have to feel a certain kind of surrender. We don't feel, it's not about feeling. All the feelings, even if you don't feel surrendered, even if you don't feel relaxed, you don't have to feel relaxed. Even if you're feeling tense and anxious, doesn't matter. You should recognize the tension, the anxiety. Those are just thoughts also. So the point is, don't allow your attention to dwell on them. Recognize them as thoughts, recognize them as unreal. Don't take your attention back from them. That's all. That's all you have to do. Recognize, which means recognize. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, basically it's metaphorically the same. All you're saying is don't get caught up in that word. That's all you're saying.
Yeah, don't get caught up in the word. Yeah, that's my objection to, yeah, it's my only objection to become an instrument, because it feels like, to me, when you say that, it doesn't have to be understood this way, but it feels like you're trying to feel a certain way. Does that make sense? So if you understand it in the way I'm talking about, then it's fine. Yeah.
So going back to the driving.
Yes. Example.
So what I'm trying to say here is, we should have an objective to go from point A to point B. That's the reason we are driving, but the driving should not take over our mental stability of thought, regardless what's going on during driving.
No, even more than that, even the idea of the objective is also a thought. So we just relax. If the objective arises as a thought, meaning it's like we're watching a movie. So on the movie screen, there's a thought. The thought says, I want to go from point A to point B. Let that thought arise. I have nothing, what you tell yourself is effectively, I have nothing to do with that thought. I have nothing to do with that thought.
Yeah, but in our daily chores, there has to be some
No.
activity and objective, right? Even though we are.
Let those objectives be fulfilled by the imaginary character over there. You imagine yourself to be over there, somebody else.
Okay.
What you think of as yourself, imagine that to be another person. That person has to put in the effort. What you think of as you, what you feel to be yourself, you relax that. So you just fold your hands and say, I'm not exerting any willpower on all of those things. Let them happen if they happen. Let them go ahead. That person can do them if they want to do it.
Is that Sakshi Bhava?
Sakshi Bhava, right? So the witness feeling. So again, this is it's a matter of language, I suppose. There's a problem with that, this idea of feeling like a witness, because the witness is also a thought. So I prefer to say that you're trying to ignore all that, because even the idea that I'm observing is a thought. So we prefer to not just ignore all of those thoughts rather than trying to be the witness. Again, same idea. That makes sense.
Basically, there are two roles. One is you are part of the activity there, but your other part of you is you are just observing or detached from that.
Yeah, you don't even have to observe it closely. You're just trying to essentially not care about it, basically. So you're trying to not particularly observe it. The only observation you need is to make sure that you are not paying too much attention to it. You're trying to not pay. It's not a mindfulness activity of I'm trying to pay close attention to it. I'm trying not to pay close attention to it. And then it blurs in the background as a result.
So there's a puzzle here, okay?
Yeah.
The puzzle. So everyone filled in their work.
Uh-huh.
There's just one piece left.
Uh-huh.
Which needs to be filled by me.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm not paying attention. I'm just sitting here. Everyone is looking at me. Everyone is
Yes.
Good, and I'm not going to do it because I don't have the willpower to do it. And no thought goes into it. So what?
So you're afraid. This is a classic example of an attachment, right? So there's fear at being embarrassed, at letting people down, all of these things, right? What are people going to think of me? No, I'm the only last piece here, right? In that moment, if you're surrendering, what you have to do is you have to regard all those fears as just thoughts and say, if it's going to happen, it will happen without me. Because the reality is, thought does arise without you. Even now, all it takes is 1 second to see this, right? Do you decide when you get your next thought? Do you decide the content of your thoughts? No, obviously not. So it's immediately evident that something else is generating those thoughts. So if whatever that thing is that generates those thoughts, if it wants to solve the last piece of the puzzle, it will do it, whether or not you think you're involved.
If I'm not physically going there.
It doesn't require your willpower to do that. It will move. The force that controls things will move the body at its will if it wants to.
Move the body.
It will move the body.
Move the body.
Yes, it will produce the thought and it will move the body if it wants to. All that can happen without you. All that does happen without you. Thing is, it's like there's an example which says, you know, the river, if it could talk, the river would say, I'm choosing to go left right now. Think about that, right? Like the river is not really choosing to go left. The river turns because of the earth around it, because of the geological forces, because of the sky and the wind and all of these things, right? The river has no individual independent choice in the matter. But if it did think, it would say to itself, oh yeah, that's my decision. But it's not, that's a fictional thing, huh?
I was going to say, if you shift the focus a little, like using the car analogy, the car is parked in the garage.
Yeah.
It is just sitting there. It is not thinking about anything, or that it has this, capacity to do it.
Right.
But when it needs to go somewhere, someone will come,
Yes.
take it out of the garage, take it somewhere.
Yeah.
Bring it back, put it back.
Yes, yes,
So
exactly.
it is absolutely detached from its utility, but it has a utility. When the need comes up,
It's used that way.
used for that.
That's
and
right.
there is nothing.
That's right.
Nothing needs to be done. That's simple, right?
That's right. That's right. I mean, I get the concern. This concern is obvious because this concern is, this is the nature of the subtle illusion, right? The illusion of what's called doership is that how can things possibly get accomplished without my focused attention and willpower? It seems impossible to understand. I get it. But when you do the practice and you confront these fears, and when you push through and say, I'm going to do the practice regardless, then if you are able to have the courage, eventually build the courage, you will see how things occur. But not till then, right? Because basically it's like, a fledgling bird, right? It doesn't think it can fly, right? But eventually it's kicked out of the nest. Until and unless the parents are going to kick it out of the nest, it won't be able to fly. So similarly, when you do this practice, there's going to be an overwhelming fear that I'm just going to not do anything. I'll just be sitting here for the next 16 hours. I mean, certain people have that as their nature, but most people don't. and most people, you'll see how it'll kick in. You'll see, for example, if a car is rushing at you on the street and you try surrendering at that moment, your body will just jump aside at the right moment, whether you like it or not. It will happen, unless you're suicidal. But, but mostly it will happen. So you'll see. The mind cannot exactly understand because it has, in order for that to manifest, it has to completely let go. And in that letting go, it's shutting its eyes. It can't see the magic, basically. If you open your eyes, the magic doesn't happen. If you open your eyes, meaning you're trying to see, like, is it occurring? It's exactly like, I've used metaphor before, but I've used all my metaphors before, like trying to go to sleep. If you say, I want to see exactly how I go to sleep, I want to watch the exact point when I fall asleep, you will never be able to do that. You'll never fall asleep. Or, yeah, basically, right? So if you want to fall asleep, you have to let go, and then sleep overtakes you at a point of its deciding, and you will never see that point. Because in order for that point to occur, what you think of as you will have to disappear. Something very similar.
I have a question. So the previous said 5 minutes that we practiced.
Yes.
I'll come back.
Okay, no problem. So, okay, yeah. Oh, you think, but
So
okay.
we mentioned that there was peace, right?
Yes.
Is that the final point? Or is that still the reflection of the mirror?
No, that's still the reflection in the mirror. Yes.
So the one person, Anu Megha, she wants to ask a question.
Sure, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome, thank you. So thank you so much for everything you shared right now. I'm trying to understand. I have a presentation next week for which I need to read a book, make notes, and present. Okay. I'm trying to understand, how can I use this concept? And I'll share what I think, and it will be great if you can then tell me if that's what you're suggesting. So when I read the book, I observe that it is me who's reading the book. So when I'm reading the book, actually, to make notes, I keep saying, okay, who is reading this book? Who is reading this book, right? And somewhere I keep that awareness on myself while reading. And then when I make the presentation also, I keep an awareness on who is making the presentation.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's it.
Yeah, so you're hunting, remember, so when you say who am I, right, you're actively trying to, you're bringing back inquiry, right? Because there's two techniques, inquiry and surrender. You bring back inquiry when you bring out this who am I question. So you're actively not just saying who am I, but you're really looking for where are you, what are you, right? That like intense hunt, right? So your attention is focused like a laser beam there, right? And everything else that enters your mind, like, okay, I have to read this book now. Okay, that's a thought, and then you immediately, well, to whom does this thought occur? To whom does this thought occur? And then the thought comes again. Yeah, but I have to read this book now. My assignment is next week. Again, who's having this thought? Who is having this thought that I have to do X, Y, and Z by next week? Right? All of that is a thought. So you feed that continuously into this process of trying to see who the observer is. Or if you're using surrender, then those very same thoughts, you just ignore them, meaning saying this is like nothing. This is all like has no relationship to me at all. This is all irrelevant. I don't care what the thoughts say. They can go do whatever they want by themselves. I don't care. So that's the attitude, either inquiry or surrender. But either way, what you're doing is effectively you're turning your attention away from the thoughts and letting the thoughts handle themselves. Like whoever brought the problem can solve the problem. So whoever wants to read the book, if someone picks up your body and turns your eyes towards the book and starts reading it, great, that'll happen. But we're not doing this. It doesn't sound like you suggested it, but we're not doing this with the implication that we have to force the work to be done, because that's what surrender means. Is whether it's done or not is not my business, basically. And whether I feel good or bad about that fact, also not my business, right? So all the feelings can come, anxiety about it not going well or whatever it is. And you just ignore, or you do inquiry and you say, who. Does that make sense?
Okay, I want to ask a follow-up question to that.
Uh-huh.
So definitely self-inquiry seems to be simpler because you're still doing what you're doing, but you keep asking who's doing it. That seems to be simpler for me.
I mean, yeah, okay. But I'll just tell you really quick. It's great. Usually one of the other techniques appeals to a person more. So that's great that you feel self-inquiry is easier. But I'll just note, right? You are going to face the exact same challenge as was noted earlier. It's going to feel like, how can I focus on the book if I'm focused on this question of who's reading the book?
Yeah.
See that? So
Right.
So it's challenging in the same way, really, actually.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So I would like to ask you about the surrender part then. If we are surrendering that there's just a thought that I need to read the book and I don't really need to read it. It's just a thought.
Yes.
So when do I really read the book? I get to the book or I don't even get to the book?
Exactly. That's not up to you. The real controller of events, the point is, it's not you. Whatever it is or whoever it is, it isn't you. So that thought comes up. Well, will I read the book or won't I? Ignore that thought. The book will either be read or it won't be. It will happen if it needs to happen.
Okay.
You're not in control of that process. That's what surrender says. So it might happen, it might not happen. We can't have any preconditions about what will happen. That's already the case. Actually, it's already the case, even now. All you have to do is look at New Year's resolutions to know how little control people have, in fact, over their lives. So the book can be read without you, without your deliberate willpower to make it happen. Can be read without you. But will it be read? You will only know if and when it happens. And surrender says, so if it's read, it's read. If it isn't read, it isn't read. If I feel good about it or bad about that fact, that's also just a natural occurrence, basically. Clouds passing through the sky. Whatever those emotions are, let them be. That is going to get you to peace, which is the direction we want to be headed, even though that peace is not final peace, but still, that's the right direction.
Mhm. Can I just ask one more
Sure,
question? So I'm curious, how did you come here today?
How did I come here today?
Yeah.
Well, it was in a car. Depends what you mean by that question is the truth, really, because that question can be answered at, from different perspectives.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my
what-
question is, if you had a thought that let's go to Yoga Bharati and give a talk today, that is
Yes.
a thought.
Sure.
And if you ignore that thought and you're practicing surrender, what made you come to Yoga Bharati today?
Yeah, so the real answer, I can give an answer by saying something like, well, God made it happen, okay? Because in fact, if there is a world, then, some intelligent force, which is not us, is what's controlling it. But the real answer is, if you want to say, if you want to dig down, is the answer to all questions about why anything happens, basically, which is ultimately that the very idea, and this is what I'm going to go to Ribhu Gita in about 30 seconds, is the very idea that things happen at all is based on the illusion that we're talking about, the illusion of the separate individual. The fact that the illusion that you believe you are a separate individual, again, it's very, very subtle and very confusing for the mind to understand. But that's what gives rise to the notion that there are things happening. And then when there are things happening, we ask, why these things? Why not those things? What is causing these things to happen? Who controls? How does it work, right? All those thoughts spread from an initial profound misconception. If you penetrate that misconception, which cannot be done just by thinking philosophically about it, but only by directly turning the mind towards that silence, then going beyond that silence, right? It will then become apparent that the question you're asking does not have the meaning that it seems to have. So I could give you a series of speculative answers. There's many different perspectives I could answer. I could say karma, I could say this, I could say that, I could say science, I could answer from 100 different would but all the different perspectives would all be flawed. None of them would be airtight. And none of them would really answer your real underlying question, which is, how does this all work? So if you really want the satisfaction to that question, you'll have to follow this process.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Let's move to Ribhu Gita now. So Ribhu Gita is going to be, anyway, it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's a long text. I've only chosen a chapter or two, and we'll see how it goes. I'm going to read it and comment on it, and also encourage you all to ask any questions that come up, because it will hopefully bring up something in you. So I'm going to read. I could have read. There's so many chapters that are beautiful, but I'm going to actually, this will be perfectly relevant to what I just said. So I'm going to start with chapter 35. So the Ribhu Gita, I really should have read up. I forget on the exact background of it, but it's supposed to have been given, I believe, to the sage Ribhu, and the Gita being the idea, a book of wisdom, essentially. And it is very much about non-duality. So this one is called chapter 35. It has a title, "The Topic of the Voidness of the Phenomenal World." So the phenomenal world is the world of phenomena, meaning all this stuff that we were just talking about. I said things that are happening. Those are all phenomena because they occur to us. Phenomena being, having the characteristic of appearing, basically. So they appear. We think that things appear. But what this chapter is talking about is this set of appearances is void, actually. It does not have, in other words, the reality that it seems to have, the substance that it seems to have, it does not have, actually. Well, what is it really? Well, that's where you have to follow the process, and you'll see what it is really. But this chapter is going to expound on this. So Ribhu says, "I shall now speak of there being only existence, consciousness, bliss." So existence, consciousness, bliss is another English translation of Satchidananda, which is one of the classical Vedantic definitions of the true self. The true self, or Brahman as it's called, is characterized by these three characteristics, namely existence, consciousness, and bliss. But we should realize in using those terms that it doesn't necessarily mean exactly what we normally mean by those terms. The existence of Brahman includes what we normally consider to be absence or non-existence. Consciousness in Brahman includes what we normally consider unconsciousness, like a state of deep sleep. And bliss includes what we would normally consider pain. The bliss of Brahman includes the ability to experience even pain as a kind of beauty, essentially. So,
The consciousness aspect.
yeah, so consciousness, though it's called existence, consciousness, bliss, or Satchidananda, the consciousness includes what might normally be termed states of unconsciousness. Like, for example, deep sleep is seemingly a state of unconsciousness, but actually the self, the true self, is aware of it. It's aware of it as a state of unconsciousness. So it's not our, see, we normally are in this waking state where we believe that what it means to be aware is to be aware like this. But actually, this is only one mode of awareness, this sort of like subject-object dual awareness, right? Where there's, I'm here, I'm independent, I'm the sort of center, and there's all this stuff that I'm aware of. We are so stuck in this particular mode of thinking that we think this is the only way to be aware, but that's not true. There's another kind of awareness, which is deeper, but it's so profoundly encompassing that it's almost the opposite in a way. It includes the opposite of this form of awareness. That's the kind of awareness it is, but it's still awareness because it's in some profound sense inclusive of it. It's just trying to reduce something which cannot be reduced to language. We have these issues. But did you have a question?
Yeah, and just to what you were saying when it comes to the void nature of phenomena, and this reminds me of just like
Yes.
void of any self nature. If anything that's known is known through the faculties of the mind, or
Yes.
to know a self, make a self, like a subject object and no other subject objects. Like I know I have a whole conception of who you are.
Yes.
And everything over there. In the same way, like when you're talking about like psychoanalysis, we're enculturated into a person, a
Yes.
name and form, and all of that is what's kind of like giving this illusion to a reality that's not really there.
Yeah, so there's definitely affinity to Buddhist teachings for sure. I mean, ultimately, I think the Buddhist teachings, a lot of Buddhists will disagree with me, but I think the Buddhist teachings and the Hindu teachings on these topics, at the deepest levels are pointing to the same thing. But yes, in the Buddhist teachings, as far as I understand them anyway, right, there's an idea of the sort of interdependence of things, right? So nothing is by itself, everything is dependent on other things for its existence. And because everything is interdependent that way, nothing has any kind of substance to it. But even that's just sort of a philosophical way of looking at it. Really, what we're talking about in these kinds of texts is it's a radiant vision of what you experience in quotes when you penetrate to the truth. But the truth is being pointed to in some sense with these texts, right? So that when you come to these states of profound quietness and yet you keep looking or you keep surrendering, a bell will ring based on these texts, and so the sense of the void is the phenomenal world, which I'll talk about more through this, will be recognized. What is it talking about? It's like it's talking about a painting you've never seen, right? And then you're going through a museum and you're like, oh my God, now I see what they're talking about. Everything that you read about the painting now makes sense. You've never seen it before. Now you see it. You're like, oh, all these disparate things suddenly seem to make sense. So anyway, an explanation that is most wondrous, pure and explicit, and of the emptiness of the entire empirical universe. It is definite that the self is all. So he says, the phenomenal universe is of the nature of the self, or the manifoldness is of the nature of the self. These are in quotes. All that is manifold is non-existent, indeed. It is definite that Brahman is all. So it's interesting, right? Because right here you almost have it's showing you a kind of beautiful contradiction in a way. It says the phenomenal universe is of the nature of the self, or the manifoldness. Manifoldness meaning what? Meaning all the differences, all the many, many differences that you see, right? All the colors, all the sounds, all the thoughts, all the feelings. This is all a series of differences. All of these are the nature of the self. And all that is manifold is non-existent. It is definite that Brahman is all. So it's saying on the one hand, all this universe is nothing but the self, is nothing but Brahman. And then it says, all these differences are actually non-existent. Because what happens is when you have when you plunge into and penetrate that illusion, the truth is that the self cannot be said to have any differences. There is some sense in which if you say that all of these differences are nothing but the self, that you are saying that in some profound way, all these differences do not exist.
And hence the self also doesn't exist.
The self as a concept doesn't exist. The self, yeah, it's true. As soon as you think about the self, now it's just a concept. So yes, actually it's said in some of the scriptures, the self is beyond being and non-being. So it cannot be said to be because only things can be and things cannot be. But the self in fact includes both. So yes, in a way. The quote, eternal experience of bliss, the concept that Brahman is eternal, the empirical universe of the nature of thought, the world of birth and death of the nature of thought. Oh, this is going to go on and on. It's beautiful though. The existence as this is, I am, or the world is, the faulty notions about one's own inner faculties, the actions of one's own inner faculties, any kind of misconception such as one's own life, one's own death, one's own birth. There is an Ishvara, Ishvara meaning God. I am the Jiva, Jiva meaning person, or the world is. The substance of delusion, the substance of greatness, the substance of thought, quote, full of the world, whatever is shown by the scriptures, whatever is expressed in the Vedas, the exhortation, it is one, talk of duality, any misapprehension that I am Shiva, the misapprehension that I am Brahma, the misapprehension that I am Vishnu, the misunderstanding that the world exists, the misunderstanding that some little difference exists, the misunderstanding that some little duality exists, the certainty that all is, the certainty that all is not, the certainty that all is Brahman, the universe of one's own contemplation, the manifest universe of one's own recollection, the phenomenal universe of the nature of sorrow, and the manifold universe of the nature of joy, the phenomenal universe of duality and non-duality, and the manifold universe of reality and unreality, the phenomenal world of wakefulness, and likewise, the manifold world of dreams, the phenomenon of the knowledge of the deep sleep state, or the phenomenon of the knowledge of the quote, fourth state. Here it's referring to what's called turiya, which is beyond the waking dream and deep states. It's another word for self-realization. The phenomenal world of Vedic knowledge, the manifold world of scriptural knowledge, the phenomenal world of sinful thoughts, or the manifold world of differing merits, like heavens and hells based on your karma, basically. The phenomenal world of the nature of knowledge, the manifold world of the knowledge of the attributeless, meaning the formless, without differences. The phenomenal world of qualities, or the absence thereof. The determination of defects and non-defects. The investigation into reality and unreality. The investigation into the mobile and the immobile. The quote, true conviction that the self is one. The concept that the self is important. The certainty that the phenomenal world is non-existent and that all is Brahman. Statements that the differences arising out of duality and non-duality exist not. The certainty that the world is indeed unreal and all is Brahman. The ideas of cause and effect and the unsettling due to multiple differences. Renouncing and throwing away thus and all that give various mantras be steadily established in yourself forever. Right, so all of these ideas are wrong, is what it's saying. All of these ideas are wrong. Even the good ideas, even the spiritual ideas, even the idea that Brahman is all, even the idea that self is all. All of those are ideas. So all of those ideas must eventually be given up if you want to see beyond. Because the truth is beyond ideas, that's the point. Beyond all of the ideas. So it puts it beautifully that way. So throwing away all of that, be steadily established in yourself forever. What does that mean? That means when you give up all thought through surrender or inquiry, then that is the establishment of the self. When you move away from thought, the movement away from thought, penetration of illusion happens, and that's establishment of the self. It goes on. The bhava of silence, action in silence, the yoga of silence, what is dear to the mind, the teacher of the Panchakshara mantra, that's Om Namah Shivaya. Likewise, the giver of the Ashtakshara mantra, the 8-letter mantra, I'm not sure what that is, but some kind of mantra. And whatever there is of the Vedas and scriptures, whatever differences there are of the teachers, and always in all the world, the imagining of all ideas, the phenomenal universe of all thoughts, the manifest world of all speech, the wrong understanding of all forms, the imagining of all reasons, the world of all defects, the world of joy and sorrow, what is to be grasped, what is to be given up, talk of what is to be grasped and what renounced, the investigation into birth and death, the nature of anamnesis, meaning remembering, and intellect, desire and anger, covetousness and infatuation, all arrogance, the duality that occurs in all three worlds, Brahma, Indra, Varuna, and all the gods, the organs of perception, sound and others, the directions, the wind, the sun and the gods, the good attitude toward the organs of action, matters of the multitudes of deities, the activities of the inner faculties, the impact of the supernatural, the differentiations of the mental modes, and the determination of the modes of intellect. So any kind of, again, thinking, right? This duality, which is mere delusion, the determination of reality and unreality, little duality, enormous duality, the duality of souls, all is ever unreal. The delusion about the origin of the world, the definition of the guru and disciple, the secrecy of the word that, and the revelation of the word you. This is referring to this Mahavakya, right? Tattvamasi, this is from the Upanishads, that you are. That's meant to reveal that the underlying essence of the world and the underlying essence of the individual are the same, right? So the secrecy of the word that and the revelation of the word you. Likewise, the concept, the sense of identity of the word are, all part of the same thing. The difference and non-difference among differences. None of these or anything else exists. This universe indeed exists not. It is definite that all is Brahman. So you see the contradiction? It's a beautiful contradiction. It just says everything doesn't exist, including all statements about Brahman. And then it says it's all Brahman, because that's the nature of Brahman. Brahman is that which goes beyond ideas, goes beyond concepts. So we don't want to cling. If you want Brahman, you can't cling to any idea of Brahman. That's a reflection. That's only a reflection, even if it's peace. All being consciousness, he, it, Brahman alone is. All this is of the nature of the self. There's nothing apart from the self. There exists no reality or unreality apart from Brahman, which transcends the quote fourth state. Renouncing all, ever be firmly established in your own self. Thought, time, differences among objects, sankalpa, bhava in yourself, renouncing all, always look upon all as indeed Brahman. This is a definition of surrender, really. All the thought is equally the same. It doesn't matter what the content of the thought is, it's all thought. Whether good or bad, it's all thought, all thought, all thought. Wherever the scriptures are given to differences, wherever the mind is given to differences, renounce all of that always and be firmly established in yourself. Imaginings due to mental projections, misapprehension due to one's own imagination, limitations due to the ego, the attitude that the body is myself, renouncing all of that, always be firmly established in yourself. The positive existence of the universe, the origin of a separate universe, thinking of the positive existence of bondage, thinking of the positive existence of liberation, the positive existence or non-existence of deities, the delineation of the worship of deities, the deity of the Panchakshara, the deity of the Ashtakshara, the existence of the 5 pranas, the subsidiary pentat of pranas, all these hierarchies are there, right? The differentiation as earth and other elements, qualities like dullness, foolishness, and others, the ultimate conclusions of the Vedantic scriptures, the Shaiva Agamas, worldly transactions, empirical reality, defects, developments, and dissolutions, renouncing all, always be firmly established in yourself. So I'm going to stop there for a moment because it goes on like this, but it's giving you an idea, right? Again and again and again and again, we get caught in concepts, and there's a ladder, right? There's subtler and subtler concepts, more and more beautiful concepts. All the concepts, every kind of concept is a problem, basically, that's what it's saying, right? Renouncing them all differences, renounce them all, turn your attention from them. In that turning attention away from them, that is establishment of self. The self is that which cannot be grasped. It can't be grasped. You give up the grasping, and that's the self. You give up the attempt to know as a second object, right? Mind wants to see something, wants to hear something, wants to experience something. Oh, this is bliss. I want this bliss again, right? This is an object. We're trying to just not grasp onto anything and be like a boulder just tossed into the ocean. Just falls. It just falls and falls and falls. And there's no bottom to the ocean. It's just falling endlessly. The endless falling is the self.
Self-inquiry and all the methods and approaches to get to a cliff, like a
Yes.
ledge, then you have to jump.
Yeah,
Then
well,
there's kind of all, that's very difficult to now describe or define.
yes, exactly.
Use all these methods
Yes.
to get there.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. You get to the cliff, and then God will push you over. That's basically what happens. So you get to the cliff, and yeah, you can't go beyond a certain point, because what you think of as you is an idea, right? You're trying to get rid of all ideas. The problem is the one idea you can't get rid of is the one who's trying to get rid of all ideas. That idea is there and it has to be taken. So something else has to come in, the self, God, call it what you will, that has to take you. All you can do is, like you said, come to that cliff and keep on trying. You stay there, right? Like stay and stay. And to stay there, because the forces are going to keep trying to pull you away, right? So in order to stay at the edge of the cliff, you have to keep trying to inquire or ignore, right? Surrender or inquire, one of the two, right? Again and again, it's like a treadmill, right? If you want to stay at the edge of the cliff, you have to keep trying and trying and trying. And
You have to remove the attachment to what brought you to the cliff.
yes, exactly.
Then you are stuck still in the methods and the modes and the ways.
Yes.
That itself has to be dropped, right?
Yes.
As you plunge into.
Yes, exactly. Precisely. It's the things that are keeping you moving away from the cliff that will be eventually burned up, right? And the reality is, your practice does not need to be, nor can it be, absolutely perfect, because the attachments are like, it's like the ocean, right? So, it's like you can't empty the ocean with a teaspoon. All you can do is try your best, and by trying your best, you will get far enough. And far enough is enough, basically. So your effort will lead to grace coming, and grace is the only thing that can rescue you, because the ignorance is it's an illusion, and as illusions, they're infinite. You can't break something which is infinite like that. It's like I used a metaphor before, but it's basically like two mirrors looking at each other, and you create an infinity of mirrors. But it's just a series of reflections. There's not really, the mirrors aren't really there. If you try to one by one try to remove the mirrors, or something like count the mirrors, like trying to remove the attachments, you would never get to the end. But you can try, if you turn the mirror enough, they'll all just disappear at once. And when you see that the root of even believing that there are attachments is the sense of ego in the first place, which is like that very, very, very subtle illusion of a very, very magical nature. It's of a nature such that if the illusion is penetrated, it will show itself never to have existed in the first place. Never to have existed. Ignorance is not something that actually exists. Ignorance is a delusion. So it's a delusion that you have a delusion, and a delusion that you have that delusion. It's delusions that you have that delusion. There's delusions all the way down. The truth, the self, is unaffected at all times, but it feels like, to a character, it feels like I'm limited. But that limitation is actually not true at all. Never at any point in truth are you limited. In truth, you're always the self. Currently, you're the self. Currently, currently you're unbound. Currently you're not suffering, actually. Currently you're not doing anything, and currently you are completely free and perfect. That's what the current state of affairs is. But it seems like you aren't. Even that seeming is wrong. It doesn't actually seem that way. It seems like it seems that way. Even that seeming is wrong. And on it goes. So, so this is the strange nature of Avidya or Maya or illusion. Very, very self-referential, you know?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So this is very, very deep and philosophically or even otherwise generally, they say Guhya Vidya, which means it's secret knowledge.
Yeah.
Until a certain point.
Yeah.
Because, throw away this, throw away that, throw away mantras, throw away God, throw away
Yes,
anything.
yes.
People are still at the bottom of the foot.
Sure.
And we are talking to them as if they are somewhere up in the middle. At least not on the
Right,
middle.
sure.
But they are not, they need mantras, they need Ishvara, they need
Sure,
Shiva,
they can.
Shivaya,
Yes,
Namaha,
yes,
all that stuff.
yes.
Contact, contact.
Yes.
So how are you going to qualify this this statement? Because you may be subjecting people to a lot of danger. I'm sorry to say this, but
No, I get
I've
it.
come across such people
Sure.
who have come to us saying, I practiced this and I got into this huge problem and this and that because they didn't want to believe in anything else because everything is white.
Sure.
So my question.
Yeah, so the way I see it is I think it's the way that Ramana Maharishi saw it as well, was the truth is that this secret knowledge is in fact ultimately self-qualifying, because if someone who is not qualified to use it uses it, tries to use it, they'll find it won't work. So ultimately, one way or the other, they're going to feel like unsatisfied. They won't be able to practice it. They won't be able to. Follow really its advice fully. They might. It's true. Misinterpret it in some way. But then, if they were going to misinterpret it, they were bound, and it's a matter of their karma basically that they're going to do that. So, I think my position on this is, anyone who feels that they would like the ultimate path, it should be revealed, and then they can see, they can try it, and they'll see if they are unable to practice it, then they certainly should step down to that mode which does suit them, But I don't think there's a necessity to conceal it. It should be put in context. I agree, and which is why it's at the very beginning, right? You need intellectual framework, you need a certain amount of emotional equilibrium, right? And those things can be obtained, for example, through mantra, through God worship, through yoga, through therapy, lots of possibilities, right? So everyone, I think, who feels an urge to find the ultimate should have the chance to see if they are currently able to wield this instrument. There's a story of I don't know, someone off the, give me the details if I have it wrong, but there's a very famous story about, I think, Arjuna, where there's a Shiva's bow, and no one can pick it up. Only the person who's qualified can pick it up, right? Everyone else can try, but only Arjuna is able to, right? Same thing with the sword and the stone, right? Sword and the stone is given by the Lady of the Lake in King Arthur's legend, right? And whoever is able to withdraw it from its sheath is, or the rock it's in, I should say, is going to be the next king of England, right? And a million people try, right? People who are very strong, they try their best, but it won't yield, right? Only the future King Arthur, who's pure of heart, is able to withdraw the sword from the stone. So it can be right there. It's right there. It's not, anyone can try it, right? But if you're not sufficiently suited to it, you'll find it won't work. You won't be able to do it. Let's put it that way.
To that idea, if whatever works for whoever, right? If for someone deity works, or chanting mantra works, I think any path you take to get to whatever ultimate is fine, right? There is no one specific or prescriptive path that we have to take. Ultimately, maybe we drop the path and everybody doing the japas or whatever it is that you put your faith in. If that works for you, then it will take you there. So
Yeah, I mean,
no need to like, abandon or be violently against something. That
yeah, I don't think there's a need to be violently against anything. But that said, I will say, I do think that, right, that many of the, so, I view it as a kind of ladder, right? So many of the, earlier intermediate steps in the ladder basically will bring you some variety of increasing quietness of mind, right? But usually, unless there may be always exceptions to everything, but usually they will not take you to the absolute finality, right? You have to go through these paths. So it's true, they all will lead you. If you do, a japa or prayer or anything else with intense fervor and devotion, you will be led to this knowledge.
and the grace will come at that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the grace will come and manifest by saying, I want more. And then that I want more, you will find this. So it will lead you to the correct place eventually.
Yeah.
I agree. I so heartily agree with you because I have recently had my own little 6-day retreat just on my own. The more I sit down and quiet my mind, the more it just didn't make sense. And then when I followed this path, which naturally I did not learn from anything per se, but naturally it led what you're saying,
Yes.
right? That there was this sword that was cutting through,
Yes.
which is the inquiry. And
Yes.
there was this another aspect which was like, let go when things came up. So that sort of happened to me.
Great.
And this talk after that experience is making so much sense. And that japa and all, I practiced all of that.
Yes. Yes.
But all of that took me to only a certain level.
Exactly. Yes.
You're so
Precisely.
right.
Yeah.
I just-
Or it could,
Exactly.
or it could be do everything, and then once you reach a level, and then you don't even cling on to anything, drop everything,
Yes.
be in the cliff kind of.
Yes.
So it's not don't do anything. Do everything, whatever works for you. And then you don't cling
Yes.
on even to that mantra.
Yes.
Even
Yes.
to
Yes, exactly, right. So precisely, you climb up from where what resonates with you, right? Because that's why we have so many different practices in religion, right, and spirituality, because, different people, some person can all they can do is go to the temple once in a while. Is that better than nothing? Yes, it is, right? Even that once in a while going to the temple, even once in a while reading the scripture, even once in a while going and visiting, someplace holy, right? Will start the seeds of a process that will flower, so it's true. Some people, I think, can deceive themselves, which is the helpful thing of having a teacher, but the reality is, as part of the process, and there are probably people who have self-deceptive processes at work in other areas of their life also, so no matter what you would have said to them, they would have deceived themselves one way or the other. So you can't blame the existence of this knowledge for that. But nevertheless, even their interest in it will eventually rescue them, So even if they do misinterpret it, they will eventually be rescued. Huh?
It seems like in my own experience, whatever it is we're doing, whether it's whether we receive Shakti, whether we're going through a monastery, whatever it is we're doing, there, like back in the day when I would go to you, for example, whatever psychoanalysis, all the different things that we're doing to help quiet the mind, eventually the truth is beyond form, and all form, whether it's any matter of techniques, all the different forms of restraint that you might do, like sensual restraint that you see in certain monastic programs. All it is just a reorientation of the direction of the senses and turning that attention back, and whatever is appropriate for certain individuals. Like for me, I have a big, I have a lot of energy. That's been a big thing in my own process of how to deal with that on an emotional level. But at the end of the day, the truth at the end of the day is beyond form, and whatever path we need to take will be whatever it is we need to take in order to be receptive enough to grace, which is not up to us.
Yeah, so I agree. The path you need to take will be the path you need to take, and everyone is in some sense like an individual little puzzle. But that said, for the most part, right, there are essentially these two classes of things, right? So there's a broad series of things that quiet the mind, and then there is kind of the top of the pyramid is techniques of discernment, because a lot of the techniques are, a lot of the quieting mind techniques don't in themselves prompt you to try to make your mind subtler and subtler, like to look, that looking, right? That's what surrender and inquiry are both about that. They're like, even if you surrender, you're ignoring, right? But when you say ignore everything, you have to ask yourself, what is everything? What am I seeing when I look around? What am I experiencing? In that process, you're looking. So that looking is very important, because in that process of looking, you discover that what you thought you were looking at is not what you're looking at. And that happens over and over and over again. So that's what's special about those techniques, is they're not a fixed object. That's what like a mantra is a fixed object or a certain vision, right? And those things can give you peace of mind. And different people have to use different techniques to get to that peace of mind, sufficient peace of mind that they can then do these final pieces. Because these final now the truth is also, by the way, I should say, these final pieces are themselves extremely powerful mind quieting techniques in themselves. So part of that looking process itself also quiets the mind, of course. But yeah, so I do want to make that differentiation, because again, the Buddha discovered the same thing, right? The Buddha is said to have tried all these different techniques, right? And none of them got him to truth, right? Finally, he had to sit down and look deep inward, right? And he finally discovered it. And it's interesting because he said, at least in some of the scriptures, that give some version of his story, that after his enlightenment experience, he had an urge to tell the truth to certain people. And the first people he picked are those people who he had encountered on his travels, who he said had little dust in their eyes. Little dust in their eyes. Meaning what? Meaning their minds were already very quiet. Their minds were quiet, but they'd only come to that very quiet mind. They hadn't quite taken that last step of looking, to whom is this quiet mind occurring, right? So he was able to tell them, and because their minds were so quiet, meaning their attachments were so few, they got it very quickly. He didn't take much. All he had to do was point a little bit, and they just got it. So, so that's the profound importance of these mind quieting techniques. But technically speaking, we want to point out that there is that act of inner looking. Okay, now we've gotten the mind quiet. Now what's here? What is going on here, right? That's what inquiry and surrender are asking. That further looking has to occur to see. That attempt has to be made. Yeah, so I'll say that. Other questions so far? I'll read a little bit more. Yes, okay, so it's going to go on like this, but I like this text because it has a kind of, I feel like as you read it, it is reprogramming you in a way, because it's really showing you how without exception, right? How without exception you have to renounce everything, all these ideas basically. And that's the real renunciation, right? It's not physical renunciation, mental renunciation. So he says, the joy of the knowledge of the self, Brahman, the defect of the lack of knowledge of the self, the incoming breath, the outgoing breath, the retained breath, the investigation into, I don't even know what this is, Shadadhara, the sextet of supports, maybe it's a yogic term, I'm not sure. The dualistic mode that I am the body, the witness attitude of consciousness, see some people sometimes mention that, right? The mode of the undivided nature, the acceptance of the undivided nature, all endless experiences included, the certainty I am Brahman, which is a common thing people say, in the Vedantic scriptures, I am Brahman, aham brahmasmi. The problem is aham brahmasmi is a verbal statement. The point is not that you believe a verbal statement. The point is that the verbal statement, I am Brahman, is pointing to an experience that you can get to if the mind is quiet and looks, the best, the mediocre, likewise, the worst and the worst, abuse, praise, all eulogy and condemnation, the philosophy of I am Brahman, this is Brahman, all is Brahman indeed. And then it says, I am Brahman, I'm young, I'm old, I'm beyond reality and non-reality, the cosmic being, the macrocosm, the attitude that the universe is gross, meaning the opposite of subtle, my being a vibration of bliss, my being devoid of the high and the low, my being the ever blissful Brahman, the embodiment of existence, consciousness, bliss, the nature of the seer, the nature of the seen, the nature of the great existence, aloneness, total destruction, entering into all beings, the past, the present, the future, and all present activity are ever non-existent. The concept of time, the concept of the body, the definition of reality and unreality, my being indeed a mass of knowledge, the peaceful and the peaceless, the taintless, recollections about the universe, the investigation into duality and non-duality, the practice in regards to the Shaiva Agamas, the expression study of the Vedas, I am Brahman, I am pure, I am consciousness alone, I am ever peaceful. Renounce all these, and as Brahman, indeed, be firmly established as yourself. I am Brahman, there's now no doubt of this, all this is Brahman, there's no uncertainty in this. Know every moment that the gross body, the subtle body, the causal body, all these different aspects of our mind and body, and all this are ever Brahman. Know that Shiva is the self, Shiva is the Jiva, Shiva is Brahman, there's no doubt of this. Whoever reads or hears this explanation either once or always is indeed liberated. There's no doubt of this. Hearing this even for a minute or half minute, he will have emerged in Brahman. The name and form of Shankar are moved for all time to fear relating to the variety of worlds made up of creation, sustenance, and dissolution. That person who investigates by means of the waves of the words of the Vedas, untrammeled by prior ideas of truth and non-truth, ascertains that this is the reality, is Shiva. Okay, so that's the end of the chapter. So, any questions so far? Or comments?
So, go ahead. So one of my teachers mentioned that if you are that,
Yes.
you don't need to go through Gita, you don't need
Yes.
to go through yoga, you don't need to do nothing.
Yes.
You are just that, it's done. So whatever you just read.
Yes.
Is basically just that's what it is.
Yeah, well, I will just say one thing to that. So this is absolutely true, but also, but as a seeker, we have to maintain this point in mind that we are until it's our direct experience. This is so we are still playing the game. So you have to maintain simultaneously two perspectives. One perspective is I'm already that. The other perspective is I'm seeking to experience that fact in my experience. And so you cannot drop effort. You have to nevertheless exert effort. The truth is your effort is non-effort. Your effort is fictional. And you will see that at the end of the process, that all this effort you put into the spiritual doesn't exist, never existed, never was an issue, never was effort, never was painful, never was exhausting, none of these things. But right now, you can't just say, I'm that, and then drop effort, because that won't get you what you want, just to let you know. Because that is a misconception some people have. So be very clear about that.
So I'm sorry, I was a little confused about that use of the word Shiva and all. Was it trying to say now you are Shiva? First shloka said, give up that Shiva, give up.
Yes.
Second one is saying you are that Shiva.
Yes. That is in fact the point, right? That there is the real Shiva is not the Shiva of the mind. When you say Shiva, we have an idea, but the real Shiva is not that. So problem is we're bound by language, right? So we can't help but speak in words. And the words we're trying to say, what this is trying to say is the words are not the words. Words don't mean what they seem to mean. How do we say this in the language which is itself problematic? When we speak, we're already making errors. How do we say that we're making errors when we say those words, we're still making errors? Even to say that all language is a problem, we're using language, which is the problem. So we can't escape that, we can't accept silence. That's a problem too, because people wouldn't understand you. So this is the nature of the trap, right? This is why the scriptures speak in seeming riddles, right? Because they can't speak more clearly than that. There's something about the nature of what's being talked about that does not lend itself to being spoken about exactly clearly, because it's about how the mind cannot see it. So the mind wants to put it into like a mental thing. It wants to make it a thing, but the truth is not a thing. So how do you say that in words which are themselves derived from thingness? All the words are about thingness. They're all about limitations, qualifications, time and space. How can you use that to describe the truth, which is beyond those things, right? You can't exactly. You have to use these kinds of contradictions, like renounce Shiva, you are Shiva, you know? It's trying to show you something about the actual fact of the matter. Yeah, exactly. Questions from Zoom or comments of any kind?
Anybody, any comment? Any comment from Zoom?
If not, I'll go on to the other chapter. This is chapter 16, and it's called Topic of the Brahman Bliss. We're talking about the bliss of the self. So I shall now tell you, this is earlier actually, but the chapters are kind of independent anyway. So it says, I shall now tell you about the bliss of Brahman, rare to come by in all three worlds, just by hearing which one can attain eternal liberation. By the way, I'll note that this tension between seeking but already being liberated was mentioned at the end of that last chapter, right? As it said, even hearing this for half a minute, you're liberated. Well, that's because what you really are is already liberated, always. But nevertheless, there's certain texts, it's funny, like the Yoga Vasishta, they'll say, even if you're liberated, read this text, you'll be liberated again. So it's funny because if you can be truly liberated, it means you are truly bound, and if you can be liberated once, why not be liberated again? Because if you can be bound once, you can be bound again. So the real liberation is recognizing that liberation is not of that nature, actually. Anyway, so
Twice fall, right?
yeah, right. Well, yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. It says, I am indeed the self that is supreme bliss, ever bliss only. I am of the nature of complete bliss. The world is all consciousness bliss. I'm ever endless bliss. This world is knowledge bliss. I am of the nature of enlightened bliss. This mind is ever bliss. I'm just simple bliss. I am just knowledge alone. Try to be of this conviction for the extinction of the phenomenal world, right? It's this idea that, it's an idea again, but we're using an idea to cut an idea, which is, see, there is a bliss that is running through everything. Whether or not the mind feels good or bad, it doesn't matter. Good or bad feelings are themselves just modifications of bliss. Just like if you watched a sad movie or saw a painting that was sad, it could still be beautiful. Beauty is independent of the good or bad qualities of the thing being experienced. It's the artistry, the craft, which comes in the form of the extraordinary specificity of things, right? Everything is so unique. So the uniqueness of things has the beauty embedded in it. Everything is just for that moment, exactly that, never to be repeated, right? Exactly specific. So that's basically the kind of bliss we're talking about. I am indeed ever the true, the supreme light, ever characterized by existence and such. I'm ever the self, devoid of existence and such, ever the light, the desirable. The self of the illusory phenomenal world does not exist. The illusion of mind does not exist. The self of what is called illusion does not exist. The mistaken self of the mind does not exist. This is what we normally think we are, is this limited, this kind of mind is what he's talking about, what's being talked about. There are none in this world who are, quote, more ignorant, nor are there any who are, quote, most ignorant among men. I indeed am Brahman. I indeed am ever myself. This is pointing to the fact that ignorance is itself a delusion. The idea of ignorance itself a delusion. Ignorance is boxed within ignorance, within ignorance, within ignorance. The idea of ignorance is itself ignorance. Here and hereafter do not exist, indeed. I alone exist. I am Brahman. I am pure. All is Brahman alone. All the world is ever unreal. Thought alone is the world. Thought alone is said to be the phenomenal world. Thought alone is the cause of the body. Thought alone is the great fault. Thought alone is the little boy. Thought alone is the great man. Thought alone is the great unreality. Thought alone is illusory self. Thought is like the horns of a hare, i.e. that it doesn't exist, right? Hares don't have horns. Like hare meaning like a rabbit. Thought is ever non-existent. This is the truth. It is like the son of a barren woman. So note again, the contradiction, right? Thought is a problem, thought is a problem, thought is a problem, thought doesn't exist, right? This is how it's showing you. It's trying to show you, this is the way it's pointing. It points by means of seeming contradiction. Thought, the idea that thought exists is itself a thought. Just like the idea that, see, because in order to say that there's a thought requires another thought. And that thought requires a third thought to say that it exists. So thought is like that, it's stacked like that in a kind of recursive kind of thing, you know? So that's the nature of the I as well, of the egoic I.
Question.
Yeah.
In deep sleep, there are no thoughts.
Right, okay, yes.
So good enough?
Well, no, not good enough, because so yeah, whether there are thoughts in deep sleep or not, so it's an interesting point, because if you view deep sleep as a state, okay, meaning which we usually do. If you mean it as a state, meaning that which is one of the states of consciousness, then it is a certain kind of thought. It's the thought of no thought. There is, they would say, I mean, it depends.
They say it's an absence of thought.
You could say it's the
It's
absence.
the thought of an absence.
Yeah, it's the thought of an absence. That's right, precisely. Because if it weren't so, then you wouldn't wake up. There's underlying thought that changes basically. It's not unchanging forever. That makes it a thought. It's a very peculiar kind of thought. You could argue it's a blissful kind of thought, but it's also a kind of bliss which is it's conditioned by the absence of any sense of separation. The reality is that the bliss of Brahman is not limited to a situation where you're unconscious like that. The real bliss is that which can be there even when there's the waking, so-called waking state. So we don't need to be in deep sleep for the bliss of deep sleep to happen. The bliss of deep sleep actually is available, not only is available, is the case right now. Right now it's the case. We don't actually have to be deep asleep for that. So yeah, so deep sleep, if you recognize that, then what we're talking about is deep sleep in some sense is always going on. If it's a state, it's a thought. If it's the reality, it's the underlying bliss of that state is actually there even when there's so-called seems to be thought going on. Because really the question is, again, how do you know, you say there's no thought in deep sleep. How do you know there's thought now? That's the question. How do you know there's thought now? And the answer is, another thought tells me that, right? So, and how do you know that thought exists? A third thought tells me that. The same thing as inquiry. You know, like, okay, I'm observing, but who am I? If you penetrate that, who am I? Then the idea that I'm observing right now will also fall. The idea that this is separate from deep sleep, because you're saying deep sleep, there's no thought. In some sense, now there is no thought. So in that sense, the states don't exist. See what I'm saying? Yeah. So only from a certain kind of incorrect perspective, essentially, do we divide things up into waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. But if that perspective is penetrated, then those divisions don't have the truth value that they seem to have, basically. It's very mysterious to the mind, I know, because the mind can't really understand fully what's going on. It can't, because it is a product of the process of illusion, right? There's the fundamental illusion is there, which is like pure confusion. And out of this confusion comes our so-called understanding processes. And what's born of confusion can't comprehend truth. It's just, it is itself the block. It is itself the curtain that hides it. So all it can do is get out of the way. You know, it's never going to really see itself what it is. And luckily, we're not the mind. That's just an instrument. Thought is the void, no doubt of this. Brahman indeed is all the world. I indeed am sentience. I indeed am the attributeless. Mind indeed is worldly existence. Mind indeed is the mandala. Mind indeed is bondage. Mind indeed is sin. Mind indeed is the great sorrow. Mind indeed is the cause of the body. Mind indeed is said to be the world of phenomena. Mind indeed is the body. Mind indeed is the great sattva, or purity, contemplation. Mind indeed is the four-faced Lord, Brahma. Mind indeed is verily Hari. Mind indeed is said to be Shiva. Mind indeed is said to be magic. Mind is mere sankalpa, or intention. I think it's what it means. Correct me if I'm wrong. Mind only is the great sin. Mind indeed is the evil-minded. Mind indeed is said to be all. Mind indeed is the great fear. Mind indeed is the supreme Brahman. Mind indeed is all by itself. Mind indeed is of the nature of consciousness. Mind it is that makes the mind what it is. See, this is the recursive thing I'm talking about. Consciousness alone is of the nature of the supreme. Consciousness alone is the supreme abode. So this awareness, what is awareness? This is the inquiry. What really is awareness? Because awareness seems to be one thing, but is it that thing actually? It's not. At this moment, I alone am the supreme Brahman. I alone am verily the supreme Brahman. I alone am the contented self. I am the embodiment of bliss. I am the self with fully matured knowledge, ever motionless and pure. I indeed am the peaceful self. I am without beginning or end. I am the illumined self. I am indeed Brahman alone. I am everlasting. There is no doubt of this. I am ever knowledge loving. I indeed am. I indeed am the one. I am totally the immortal. I alone am the self-determined. I alone am the approver. I indeed am you yourself. I am the self of all, devoid of all. I indeed am the supreme Brahman. I'm higher than the highest. Ego, there is none for me. No sorrow and no faults exist for me. No happiness exists for me. There is no knowledge for me, no thinking for me, no body for me, and no senses for me. Lineage, there is none for me. There are no eyes for me, no role for me, nothing of the least or trivial for me. Japa, there is none for me. No mantra, no world, no friend exists for me. Relatives, there are none for me. No enemies exist for me. No mother and no father exist for me. There is nothing to be experienced by me. No experiencer for me. No activity for me. No lineage for me. Caste, there is none for me. No community, no study of the Vedas are there for me. Never for me. Exterior, there is none for me. No knowledge is there for me. No place or peer exists for me. Philosophy, there is none for me. No world exists for me. No peace is there for me. No line of descent exists for me. Anger, there is none for me. Nor is there desire for me. I'm only a Brahman alone. Being just Brahman alone, I'm just myself. There's no attachment or covetousness or stotra or hymn or scripture for me. Delusion, there is none for me. No desire exists for me. No friendship is there for me. There are no qualities for me. No sheaths for me, meaning the mind and the body. No childhood for me. No youth for me. And no senility for me. As all are of the nature of Brahman, it is certain that Brahman is one. There's nothing higher than Brahman. There's nothing apart from Brahman. There's nothing as this apart from Brahman. Verily, there is nothing as this apart from Brahman. There never is anything apart from Brahman. I am indeed the self. There is no doubt of this. Apart from the self, there is no happiness. Apart from the self, I do not exist either. I'm devoid of grasping or anything to be grasped, devoid of renunciation or anything to be renounced. There is nothing to renounce from me, nor is there anything to acquire. There is no bondage, nor is there anything that can offer liberation. No world exists for me, and there is nothing inferior, nothing superior, and nothing adverse. There is no strength for me. There are no outcasts for me, nor are there castes such as Brahmins. No protection exists for me. There's nothing short for me, nothing weak for me, and no strength for me. There is no power for me, no enjoyment for me, no destiny for me, and no separateness for me. Being only Brahman, I'm nothing apart from eternality. There is no religion for me, and no illusion for me. There's truly no body for me, ever. There is surely no such thing as I, nor any such name as Brahman. Whatsoever phenomenal world there is, whatever, whatsoever words of the Guru there are, I am indeed. All that is Brahman. All that is considered as consciousness. Brahman is consciousness, ever the reality, ever the reality. One is oneself Brahman. One is oneself the supreme. One is oneself liberation. Oneself is continuity. Oneself indeed is empirical knowledge. Oneself indeed is atheism. Oneself is ever the essence. One is oneself the supreme. One is the self of the void. Oneself is the mind captivating. Sitting in silence is the holy ablution. Sitting in silence is the japa. Sitting in silence is the worship. Sitting in silence is the highest. Inquiring constantly with the mind, be of the certitude that I am Brahman. There's no doubt that I am Brahman. Remaining silent thus is the japa. All is only Brahman, nothing else exists. All is the nature of the tapas filled with knowledge. There's nothing indeed as oneself. I'm of the nature of the all transcendent. I transcend words. Doing japa with words is meaningless. This is the highest explanation of the mind. A difference such as I, this, does not exist for me. All beings are like corpses. All groups are as corpses. The world is ever unreal. All the universe is unreal. Being a thing apart is unreal. There is no such word as unreal. Being something is unreal. You yourself are ever Brahman alone. The Vedas, the branches of the Vedas are unreal. The conclusions of the scriptures are unreal. This listening is very unreal. Reflection on that is also unreal. Profound meditation too is unreal. Classification as a particular group is unreal. Classification to different groups is unreal. This is the truth. This is the truth. There is no doubt of this. All is Brahman, ever Brahman, ever Brahman. Brahman is one, the changeless consciousness.
Looks like Vibhuti Yoga in Bhagavad Gita.
Is that right? What is that? What is Ribhu Yoga?
I am in the Himalaya. I'm in the mountains. I'm Himalaya. In the like a saint. I'm the Kapila sage. I'm best of everything. I am.
Yes.
I am in the month. I am the mind Margi.
Krishna
Like,
saying this.
Krishna
Right?
says,
Krishna's talking about
Vibhuti Yoga
this.
says,
Yes.
who am.
Yes.
Like,
Who God is. Right?
No,
All these
like
different
everything,
things,
like all. If you see beauty, that is me.
Yes.
Like in the say, like
Yes,
that.
yes,
In
yes.
Rudra, like in Rudra, I am Ishvara. Like 11 Rudras are there, right? So like,
Yes, yes.
best one is me. Everything best I am.
Yes,
like
yes.
that.
It's like that.
Like
Exactly. Yes, yes, exactly.
And
Yeah,
that's
right.
a crust of like 11th, the Vibhuti Yoga, the
11th chapter.
10th chapter.
10th chapter. Sorry, you're right. 11th chapter is something different.
Brahma, this one,
Vishrupadarshana.
Vishwarupa.
So that's the essence, right? This is the secret knowledge. This is pointing, right? To see. This should hopefully ring a bell, right? And when the time is right, if you look, this bell, where the source of the bell ringing will become apparent, But this is what it's trying to show, right? Out of the mind. There's a prison of mind, basically, through which thought is all like there. It doesn't move out of that, basically. This is trying to move thought out of that prison, basically. Yeah, it's poetry. So any comments, questions?
Why 26 chapters considered like, is it?
I think Ramana Maharishi said the 26th chapter was a particularly beautiful chapter. He really liked it, recommended people read it. I think so. I mean, I don't know exactly why he liked, probably, I mean, much of the Ribhu Gita is very beautiful. So I think it must have struck him as, particularly wonderful. Yeah.
It's written by whom?
I think I have to double check. I think it was Shiva wrote it, gave it to Ribhu or something like that.
Oh,
Ribhu was
okay.
a sage, yeah. I
Okay.
think so. Sorry?
Which chapter is this?
So the first chapter I read was chapter 35. That was on the voidness, the phenomenal world. And this chapter 16 was 16, topic of the Brahman bliss, basically.
16, okay.
16. So you can see, right? Avoid all the ideas. That's surrender. That is surrender, basically. So ideas are trying to entrance you. Just recognize them as noise. This is all noise, right? That practice, and the same thing that will automatically reduce to come to not using willpower, basically. And that there's, if you truly ignore all the thoughts, right? There's no past, no future. Everything that this has said, if you ignore thoughts, describes the ignoring of thoughts, There's no problem, no attribute, no facet, no doing, no relationship. All of those are thoughts. If you ignore all the thoughts, you are very, very, very close to self, let's say. So,
So which book is this?
oh, it's called Ribhu Gita, R-I-B-H-U, which is who was a sage at some point, and the Gita, G-I-T-A. Yeah.
And is this something Ramana Maharshi recommended?
Yes, Ramana Maharshi liked this book very much. Yeah, and he particularly liked a certain chapter. But I think he must have liked all the chapters. I think he liked the book, period. Yeah, so that's the connection with Maharshi. Like this is a perfect essence of the most uncompromising. Yeah.
And you have to become like that, not just stating,
not just
stating.
Yes.
You are the self, and you become like all
Yes.
those things. What is described?
Yes. If you take this and then you follow it by treating the world in this way, right? You treat the world as ever unreal, ever non-existent, right? All the differences are meaningless. That is surrender. And then by practicing that, the truth will then shine. The underlying truth of that fact will shine.
Further questions? Do you have like a contact?
Yes, you're welcome to email me. So you can just email me my name, Akilesh, Akilesh, at siftingtothetruth.com. I'll spell that for you. SIFTING to the truth. TOTHETRUTH.com. So one mistake I know a lot of Indians make is they spell my first name, this is my first name, with an H after the K, AKHILESH, which I think is how it's spelled more commonly, actually.
But in the
the spelling,
it's in the flyer actually.
it's on the flyer, it's on my
Yeah.
website, you put AKILESH at sifting to the truth, not shifting, sifting. I should have chosen a shorter website name, but yeah. So anybody else? Sorry?
He responds.
Yeah, I usually do, actually.
So do you hold any talks?
I'm working on that. It's still all up in the air right now. I'm going to, and this is, my presence here is part of a desire to speak to more groups of people, actually. A lot of what I've been doing in the past has been mainly like just individuals. So I'm trying to speak more to groups, and so this is part of that. So I don't have a exactly a precise agenda yet, but it's coming. But on my website, if you go to my siftingtothetruth.com, there's a mailing list, and if I do have any announcements, I will definitely send it through the mailing list. And there's a bunch of videos if you're interested more in surrender and self-inquiry. There's a couple of books. All those things are there. Resources are there, and you can email me too with any questions you have. So, but I encourage you, if you're interested in these, try putting them into action in daily life. That is the most powerful place they can go. So try it. And if you feel anxious and fearful, try feeding those emotions back into the practice. So if you're doing surrender, if you feel fear, like the car is going to crash, for example, right? Try, if you can, right? Either inquiring into who has that fear, who am I? See, the thing is, the reason the fear bothers you is because it's your fear, quote unquote, but that your fear is premised on you being this undefined entity. You're like some kind of shadow entity. You don't look clearly at what you are, which is why you can say it's my fear and then be fearful. But as soon as you start thinking, well, yeah, but I say it's my fear, but who am I? At that point, immediately there's a shift, because you don't quite know who you are. And if you can really absorb the implications of that shift, that will completely transform everything, because everything is based on this I person. But who is this I exactly? You don't know, right? And if you really, really take that into account, suddenly everything is going to change in value, Anybody else on Zoom? Comments, questions?
And some people have left, but
Okay.
they thanked you and all.
Sure, go ahead.
Are you close?
No, it's fine.
This is about, yes, this inquiry is great, and there is, at a certain point, you start getting drawn to it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and then you just simply want to, like what they were all saying, should I do this or should I do that?
Yes.
There's no question. It simply just draws you towards that. And I have found places where, there is this pull so great that at certain points, there's a place of fear.
Yeah. Yes.
You let it go.
Yeah.
I have hit that so many
Yes.
times.
Yes.
So then you simply, like you said, bottomless pit, and then the fear is so immense
Yeah.
at that point
Yes.
that it brings you back.
Yes.
This is what I think
Yes.
happened.
Yes. Yes.
And also there is even in the day-to-day life fear, which is, am I going to be lost to my family?
Right.
You see, that's
Yes.
the
Sure.
pull of
Yes.
all of these. And there
Attachments,
is
yes,
what
yes.
we call dharma sandikta, which means, which is my duty and which is where am I
Yep,
supposed
yep,
to be?
yep,
Right?
yep.
All of these
Yes.
existential
Yes.
questions. I mean, existential reality
Yes.
fear.
Yes.
I mean, this is not a simple fear. And I have hit that in those 6 days also.
Yes.
And, after you come back, you feel so miserable that I wish I had continued, right? This kind of like this whole, this toss and turn. How do you address that?
Yeah. So the fear you're talking about, existential fears of falling into a bottomless pit and being a more mundane fears of your daily tasks or doing your duties and all that. They are all attachments. And so there is, the first fear you talk about, which is sort of the deepest of it, which is the mind being lost to itself, in some sense is like dependent on the other two, because essentially the fear arises, that the basic fear arises because of the attachments, because of things like, I'm going to be lost to my family, I'm going to be lost to myself. What has to happen to get to that deepest fear is all the attachments have to be softened. And so the most deepest core attachments like family and all that may be the hardest to soften. But what you do is, it's like the water going into, like eroding the coast of an island or something like that, right? The middle of the island is not going to be accessible immediately. You have to keep eroding the outside, which is the most accessible first. And you do what you can, and slowly, the island loses its coastline more and more and more. And it will eventually soften even the middle part. That makes sense? So all you can do is what you can do. And I will also say, right, so again, if you can't do, the hope is continuity during the day. And if you cannot do, for example, inquiry or surrender, then try doing a practice that you can do, like karma yoga, for example, right? Where you are doing something intentionally, you are doing your duties, you're not losing yourself fully, but you are at least trying to recognize that, trying to keep indifference to the results, basically, right? And view it as a dedication to God, if you want, right? Some kind of spiritual element of continuity we want. So surrender and inquiry would be too scary in some situations to carry out. So if you can't do them, do what you can, even if it's just thinking of God for a moment, whatever you can do in that moment, do. And slowly over time, the attachments will soften in series, and finally it will come to that center point. So it makes complete sense what you're saying. It's just a matter of time and doing what you can, and it will eventually come to the point where that fear itself, because what will happen is, as the attachments weaken, your identification with and attachment to yourself will also weaken, because that core attachment, the core fear, is based on the movement of all these other things. When those quiet down and weaken, this core fear will also weaken. And also, by the way, as you do the practice, in the process, you're going to see, right, you're going to encounter more and more peace. And maybe you will also encounter, I'm sure hopefully you will eventually encounter, if you haven't already encountered it, these sort of glimpsy flashes of insight, right? Those are kind of eye-opening experiences which will give you access to the sort of fourth state of consciousness for certain periods of time, which is still, of course, not the self. It's just an experience. But what happens is the mind touching those kinds of experiences, and peace, generally speaking, like slowly, like learns to trust more and more, right? It's like it's like one of those trust falls, you know, they do in like corporate training things, like where you fall backwards and you hope that someone catches you, you know, and maybe if someone didn't grow up in a good environment, that'd be very hard for them to do. But eventually you try it again and again, and you are caught, and eventually you trust that it will happen. So in the same way, the mind will touch the piece more and more and more, and let go more and more and more, and we'll start to see that, oh yeah, I mean, all my fears are not being realized, actually. This is actually pretty good. And as that happens, it will learn to trust more and more. And the fear will weaken. That's how it goes.
There's some comment from Raj. Hi, Akilesh. Perhaps surrender can be practiced initially in situations where the ego fears consequences less. And karma yoga is cases where ego is terrified of consequences.
Beautiful, yeah.
Would this be a reasonable approach?
Yes, absolutely. Be a very reasonable approach. 100%. Yes, definitely. All right, anybody else? All right, well, thank you so much. And
it was such a wonderful whole week, whole of from Saturday onwards.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can I-
sure, go ahead, sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this program. We had like a million things going on, but I just did not want to let go of this one somehow. Thank you, Gita, for accommodating. We have this whole big research program is going on where 138 registrations have come for our research on yoga for ADHD. So with that whole thing going on, we did not want to let go of this session, and the Acharya, thank you so much for enlightening us, and we hope that in the coming years you will visit more and we will be able to organize.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ashwini. It's always
Thank you all.
Thank you all for participating. Yeah, Zoom participants as well as in-person participant all through the week. It was wonderful. Yeah.
Anybody wants to have some juice?
So everybody has.
I'm good, actually. Thank you so much. I'm great.
Okay, bye.